All the tools and technologies I love to use and talk about aren't necessarily the easiest things to learn, especially with all the changes that have been happening to React over the years. I could just keep making videos explaining each of these features that get a decent number of views, but there's no good overall view, and nothing will get you that view better than a full stack tutorial where you actually go through the process of building everything yourself. This tutorial is the hardest I've worked on a single video in a while, and you'll understand once you start going through it, because we're building a full Google Drive clone from scratch. Yes, Google Drive, like the thing to manage files. It's not a simple app. I thought I'd be able to make it pretty short, but we didn't succeed there. This tutorial is structured very differently from the ones I've done in the past. Rather than just going and coding the project, then coming back and trying to recreate it live with you, I wanted to go through all the things that I normally experience when building. So instead of avoiding rabbit holes, I jumped down them. Instead of hiding from the AI tools I develop every day, I use them heavily. And instead of trying to debug off stream and off recording and then show you what I found after, I actually go through a lot of my debugging process with you. The goal of this tutorial is less to just show you the tools and tech, more to show you how to really think through and build with modern tools and technologies. Everything from the editor to the actual tech stack to the places that we deploy. One last thing before we get started. The only reason a tutorial of this length that took this much time to make can be free is thanks to the awesome sponsors making it possible. Huge shout out to Clerk, SingleStore, Netlify, and Posthog for jumping on the opportunity. These are all great tools I can easily recommend, so having them in here only makes sense, and I'm so thankful they're willing to foot the bill so y'all can get this for free. I don't like charging for education materials, and I'm so thankful we found a way to make this happen. So without further ado, let's head to the lab. I personally like to try and get the project working and deployed as early as possible, so when you introduce new pieces and make changes, you're less likely to run into something that's broken. It's so common for devs to have a fully working app on their machine, then when they go to deploy it, everything falls apart. So where you can, I highly recommend getting deployed early. So let's do it. npm create T3 app at latest. We're not going to be using the whole T3 stack, but there's a lot of good stuff in here that will make things like ESLint prettier and environment variable management much easier for any Next.js app. We'll be naming this project Drive Tutorial. If you can, name it the same thing. It just makes a lot of random small things easier. Got TypeScript. Will we be using Tailwind, of course. I would like to use tRPC, but for this tutorial, I think it's simpler to not, so I'm just going to hit no here. Not a big deal if you hit yes and you want to use it for some things, but the goal of making this as simple as possible, I'll be avoiding it now. Speaking of making things as simple as possible, I wouldn't wish Nextauth on many people today. We'll be using Clerk instead. We're going to pick Drizzle for the database. Next app router, obviously. What database provider? This is an interesting question. I'm going to pick SQLite because it's the simplest solution, and we'll move this all over to SingleStore in just a little bit. Should we initialize? Sure. Yes. Yep. Awesome. Look at that. Now we are inside of the project. We will open it up in our editor, and look at that. We got all sorts of fun things here. I could do an overview. I don't want to distract you guys too much with it. The few things that matter over a more traditional create next app code base are that we have the env.js file. This file uses the T3OSS environment variable package, T3env. It just makes it so you won't run into that wonderful problem where there's something missing from your environment variables and everything goes wrong in deployment with weird, obscure errors. Now you'll get an error on build, like it always should have been. This package is great, really happy we have it, but most of our time is going to be spent in app/page and all of the things that come from it. So let's make sure this all works as expected. npm run dev. Hover over the browser. I have a local host open here. Just refresh it. And here we are, a working homepage. It's very simple. We can change the contents to make it even simpler, just to make sure all these pieces work. Sup nerds, you're subscribed, right? The add apostrophe here is because technically you're not supposed to put things like an apostrophe in your JavaScript files. They should be wrapped with a string. The other way I prefer to do this, wrap it like that. But now we go back here, sup nerds, you're subscribed, right? So simple. Let's get this committed and deployed just so that we have a starting point. Get status, get add, get commit, init, and get push. Oh no, we don't have a repo for it yet. There's a couple ways we can fix this. We could use gh-repo init if you have the GitHub CLI installed. I hate it. I think it is really not good. So instead, we're going to go to github.com directly. Kind of click the little new button, new repository, Drive tutorial. I'm going to make it private because I don't want you guys to see this before we're done. Make sure you don't check any of these because then you won't be able to push up a new state. Hit create. I don't know why this is second because I feel like, yeah, it is what it is. We're going to grab that, just hit copy on the second section here, go back to your terminal, paste, enter. As long as you have your GitHub set up properly, this will now push. Now we have this all up on GitHub. Let's get it deployed. We'll be hopping over to Netlify, sign in if you haven't. Thankfully, GitHub is an option. Making a new site is not that hard at all. Import an existing project, GitHub, triple checks that you're authed, and now we can search for our repo. Again, this is why having the same name makes things a little bit easier. Drive-tutorial, and here we are, Drive tutorial. Theo stuff, site name. I doubt this will be available for y'all because I'm taking it, but come up with your own clever name for your site. Base directory, none of this needs to be changed because it's smart enough to know that we're using Next.js. Environment variables, we can just fill them in so we don't get a build error. I'm just going to hop over to our .env here. We see this is the database URL by default. We'll absolutely be changing that in the near future. But for now, we can paste it in, make sure the key and the value are correct. Those match exactly. Deploy, drive tutorial. Obviously, in the near future, we'll have things in here that are more secrets, not just like random paths to files. So for now, it's okay that you guys are seeing this. In the near future, you'll be getting all of my secrets that I'll have to reset before the video goes live, so you guys can't take advantage of all the services I set up. But it is important to know anything in here should be considered private. It also should not be committed. That's why I just entered it manually. Environments are not meant to be committed. They are meant to hold things that are specific to your deployment, most of which are private and not things you would want to have shared. If you do want it public because you want the user to have access to the data, then next public needs to be the prefix for the environment variable. Looks like we're deployed now. Let's go take a look. Site overview, drive tutorial, and look at that. We are live. What's cool about platforms like Netlify is now that this is linked to my GitHub repo, all I have to do is save a change and push, and we'll automatically get those changes deployed to our users with no additional work on our part. I think that's great. Also, if we make pull requests because we want to try out new things or, you're working with a team, all pull requests will also get their own builds right in line in the pull request itself, which is so handy when you're working on big projects with a lot of people. Being able to test the things that they actually built without having to download all the code yourself, spin it up and play around is so nice. Having that just baked in for free is still unbelievable to me. Normally, I would go straight into plugging the database in, but honestly, I want this to look a little bit better. So I'm going to skip to that part. We're going to use V0 for this because it makes things relatively easy to set up. I am on a premium account, but everything you're about to see is free, and I will be sharing the actual environment I create so you can copy from it directly. V0 uses shadcn heavily. If you're not already familiar, it's a phenomenal open source component library where the components aren't npm installed, they're actually copy pasted into your code base. It's built on top of Tailwind and Radix, and I have been so happy with it. It's going to make stuff like what we're doing here way easier. So we're going to ask it to do what we want, which is make a basic Google Drive clone UI. Use mock data. The mock data callout is important because we want it to be easy to get it working and see it, but also have a clear point for us to reference as we build our own data model. Folders should be openable, and files should be direct links to the file. Make sure to include a mock upload button. We'll see how it does on the first run. What's cool with tools like this is even if they're not quite right the first time, you can edit the code or you can ask it to fix its stuff. So we will see how it does here. Looks like it's making folders as well as creating files here. I've actually quite enjoyed using tools like this, not because I'm too lazy to write all the code, but it's actually just nice to try out different UIs more quickly. If I want to try out different ways to structure things and I'm not quite sure what I want yet, a tool like this can be great, even if I don't use any of the code, just to get an idea of what it could look like. So here, I actually don't like the UI we got. I want it to be a more traditional list view, and I hate having the folders on the side. Don't love this rendition. Here's some things to change. Dark mode by default. Remove the sidebar. Folder view should be a list. Include breadcrumbs on top for navigation. If you're not familiar, breadcrumbs are the little thing on the top of a folder system when you're navigating through that show you all the different places you can go up or down. So you could say this, for example, would be breadcrumbs, where the top is project, and then you have Google Drive clone as the layer right underneath. That looks significantly closer to what I had in mind. And now we can see they have the breadcrumbs on top. You can navigate between different things. That was a bad direct link, but it's doing what it's supposed to. It all appears, for the most part here, to work. Pretty handy. So how do we actually get this into our code base? We have this folder here, this file that has all the stuff in it. We could copy paste it, but we're not going to have a lot of these components. We're not going to have the icon library being used here. We're not going to have button. We're not going to have almost any of this. Easiest way is to copy the code by clicking the little add to code base button. It gives you a shadcn command to run. You hop over here, I paste, press enter. It's going to ask if I want to make these changes, override these things, like the New York colors. I hate the gray in the zinc colors. The bluish that they end up in is horrible, so we'll be going with neutral. We'll use CSS variables. This is going to error because it's missing some of the packages. Totally fine. I hit yes to override the page file because it has no contents I care about. Normally I would restart the project, but I'm honestly curious if it just works. So we're going to give it a go and see what happens. I cannot find module for page, route not found, /page. Cool. So it does break. Clear, pnpm run dev. And if all goes well, this should just work. Oh, it's unhappy because of things that it expects to be in page that aren't. Oh, I know what happened. This happens half the time. Proof that none of these tools are even close to perfect. It made a folder named app and put the styles in there, but then also updated this one too. And I don't know which I'm actually supposed to be using here, which is quite annoying. At layer base, we'll use the default ones that come with shadcn. I'm going to delete this app folder. Make sure if you're using a source subdirectory that you're not also using the app root directory because of the conflict that will really confuse Next.js into not knowing what to do or what to render. I'm going to clear just in case if you ever run into weird things with Next, rmrf, the .next directory, pnpm run dev, and now, look at that, all working as expected. You'll notice the navigation is occurring in the page rather than in the URL bar. Like if I refresh, it's going to bring me back to the root because we haven't hoisted this navigation up to be part of the URL params. We'll do that in a bit. Don't worry. We could get fancy and do nested routing there, but we're just going to use file IDs and folder IDs. So let's get this, as always, committed and pushed so we know it works. I'm going to do something interesting. I want you guys to see the branching workflow. So we're going to make this a branch. Theo /new UI. Git commit. Normally when I do changes like this, I'll git add -p so I can do a little short code review. But in order to keep it brief and to get this onto GitHub as quickly as possible, I just did git add -a. Now we're going to commit new UI mocks for drive. Git push. I have a really fun flag in my git config. On push, I have auto set remote true and default current. This makes it so I don't have to like git remote at origin or change anything when I'm just trying to push a branch. It's one of those little things that just made my life a lot better. I would recommend setting that up so when you git push, you don't have to do any additional stuff. Now we go back over to GitHub and create a pull request, new UI mocks for drive, create PR, and in just a moment, you'll see the magic of platforms like Netlify. And there we are. Look at that. The Netlify bot showed up. It is now doing a deployment for just this branch. You can see all of the things being configured and handled here. So cool that I didn't have to set up anything. I didn't click any buttons. Just by importing the repo on Netlify, we now have automatic preview environments for all pull requests. I could wait here. I could set up my own CI. I could review it. I could have an AI review it. You get the idea. But we actually should look at the code. I try to look at all the code one more time before we actually merge. Wherever that time is, it could be during a -p, or it could be somewhere like this. All looks good. We added the React slot package from Radix UI, class variance authority, which allows you to have multiple different class names that conflict in groups around them. With Tailwind, we have CLSX, which lets you turn class names on and off depending on conditions. Lucid, which is a package of icons. Tailwind merge, which makes sure if your specific class names conflict in Tailwind, they're handled, as well as Tailwind animate, which will make animations a lot easier. Here we can see the overhauled page TSX file. It is use client. We will probably move that to use server so we can get some server data, but it all looks fine. Here we have the button component, which comes straight out of shadcn. Nothing to see there. For the most part, things in components/UI, I don't find myself needing to review very thoroughly. We have our mock data, which looks like a fine starting point, has type folder, type file. Both are being sourced together. We'll figure out how we want to model the data in the near future. We have source libutils. That's just all part of the shadcn stuff. We have our new global CSS for styles. Still includes the Tailwind stuff, but they have the new base layer for root and dark mode. All seems fine to me. So I can't approve my own changes, probably for the better. Oh no, what went wrong with our deployment? Files defined but never used, indexes defined but never used. Here's a quick, super hot Theo take. I don't like having my preview builds blocked by small one-off issues that exist in our code base. So if we're importing file here, but we're not using it, I don't think that should block me from deploying. This is just a type error effectively. So what I like to do is inside of my next config, I turn off two things. The first is we want ESLint. One of these is ignore during builds, true. And then there's a similar thing for TypeScript. Ignore build errors, true. This might seem terrible. Why are we turning these off? Well, honestly, we'll just add CI later on. I could add it now if I really wanted. You just make a .github folder, copy paste any of the example TypeScript checkers, and let a CI check. Make sure your types are good and you're not making any dumb mistakes before you deploy. But for now, I'll just do this because I know the code is fine. Git add -p, save. Apparently I saved the file, which caused a lot of things to be reordered. Totally fine with me. We'll commit both. Disable ESLint and TS during builds. Some prettier changes. Git push. And now this should hopefully work. Hopefully this helps emphasize what I mean about trying to get preview deploys up quickly, because now, since something went wrong, but we had a deploy that worked before, we knew it had to have been something that changed since our first deployment. In this case, the change was simple. It was a type error that shouldn't, in my opinion, have blocked build, but now that is handled. And just because it's important, we'll start that CI. We'll do .github, new folder in GitHub named workflows, and in here, a file named ci.yaml. I already have contents from my pickthing repo. So I'll paste this. In order to make sure you're not just copying code that you don't understand, we'll go through it really quick. This is a YAML file, yet another markup language. This YAML file describes what GitHub should do whenever we push. So on push, we have a job that we run named build. It runs on Ubuntu and it has steps. First, it checks out the code using the official GitHub checkout action. We then install dependencies. npm install -g pnpm. This is to set up the pnpm global. I'm sure there's an image that has that already set up. I'm lazy. This works fine. Then we pnpm install. We then copy the env example files because if we don't do that, then the build will fail because there are environment variables missing. We then run the type check, pnpm type check, and we run lint, pnpm lint. I believe both of these should already be in here thanks to create T3 app. Looks like they are. Super handy. And that means I can set this up real quick. Git status, git add -a. -a will always grab new files, whereas -p won't. Git commit -m CI. And now, if we go back to GitHub, we'll see my new CI here. You'll also see that the preview build succeeded, and I can click on this link here to see my preview deployment up and alive on an actual URL. This isn't running locally on my dev machine. This is an actual environment on the web that I could send the link to a coworker or somebody else doing a test. So nice to have an actual usable thing that I can go play with to see if these changes that my team made are good or not. But we just pushed the CI, which means now we have this CI/build step that is baked in to our pull requests that will automatically run whenever we push to a new branch or even domain directly. Very nice to know that if something goes wrong, we have that right there. And we can see that this is failing because, again, it is doing the linting and it's seeing that we have the file and the index on page TSX that are not being used. Thankfully, if there's anything that's erroring there, it's almost certainly also erroring here. So we scroll down. I don't know why it used the OR syntax here because nullish coalescence makes way more sense. If you're not familiar, the double question mark here, what it does is if this value exists, it returns that value. And if it's null-ish, which means null or undefined, then we instead return this value. It's like a simple version of the ternary where you have file URL question mark, file URL, or some other fallback, but a way nicer, clearer syntax. Whereas the OR syntax, technically if file URL was false or empty string, this would return this instead because those are both falsy values, and this is checking for falseness. But we don't want it to check for falseness. We want it to check for nullish. So the question marks make more sense there. Good error. And here we're importing file, which I'm assuming is the type from mock data. It is. And we don't need that because the data is not being passed to our component. In the future, we'll probably need a type like that. But for now, we don't. All looks good to me. Git add -p. Did I forget to save after that? I did. Git add -p once more. Git commit fix build. And now if we go back to our pull request, we'll see the new build is queued. And you can also see for individual commits whether or not they passed and what they didn't pass. This is why I really like using tools like Netlify and like GitHub CI and using pull requests wherever I can, because you can see when things do and don't work, and it makes debugging, figuring out errors, and getting out of weird states just so much easier than it otherwise would be. And look at that. All our checks passed. We're good to go. Merge pull requests. And now that this is merged, we're good to go. We'll automatically have this deploy to main on Netlify, which means that the URL that is set for your project is going to be where this is deployed, which also means we don't have to really look at this anymore and we can get back to work. So we have all of this now. It's not a real data model, but we are storing all the state here. We got a couple things we're going to need to do. Personally, I really like putting something in like a README or a note-taking app somewhere that's keeping track of the stuff that we have to do and consistently updating it as we find things that we need to be working on. So let's do a quick rough what's coming up here. Name this drive tutorial. Gonna kill all the other content here. Put a to-do. Interesting that it's trying to autocomplete all that. I get too tempted to just press tab on these things when I'm in a markdown file. I'm gonna ignore the temptation and write what we actually need to do. Set up database and data model. Move folder open state to URL. We need to add file, uploading. We got a lot of other stuff to do. Add auth. And honestly, I think for a starting point, this isn't the worst. I'm going to quickly move auth up a layer because doing file uploading without auth will be a bit silly. Cool. I'm happy this is a point to get started. So now that we have this all working, it's in a good state. I'm going to take these changes. Oh, I forgot to switch back to main. So we'll stash, git checkout main, git pull, git stash pop. Add -p so we can look at these exact changes. Looks like not too much to see here. So I will do Y, which is to select those changes and approve them. Git commit -m. No, you can't see it because it's too high up, whatever. You get the idea. You know what a commit message is. Update readme. Git push. That will trigger a build even though nothing changed in the actual code. Who cares? Builds are effectively free. And now if we refresh, we'll see the updated readme. Cool. I think that means it's time to set up the database. As I mentioned before, we're going to be using SingleStore. It's a really awesome database if you want a database that does pretty much anything. It sounds absurd, but it really is. They are used by tons of big companies. It makes scaling your database with SQL really easy. You get the performance you'd expect from a document database. You get analytics powers that you would expect from an analytics database, all while getting the fancy things like joins that you would expect from MySQL or other similar solutions. It's really easy to get started, and importantly, they already have drizzle bindings made for us, which will make setting it up significantly easier. You sign with your GitHub, I'm already signed in. Let's go create a new deployment. You get one database for free, which is very handy for us. Name it drive tutorial DB. If we all name it the same thing, it makes life much easier, so name it that if you can. You could pick a region, as long as the region is US East 1. That's fine. Database name, drive tutorial DB. Cool. Create starter workspace. Now we have this new DB up. Let's connect to it. Click here, click your app. And here we have a generated unique token. We need to give this a name. I like the name to indicate what this is going to be used. So we'll call this drive Netlify deployment. So that's what we'll be using it for. It's also for dev. Ideally, you have different tokens for both. Ideally, you have different databases or environments for both, but whatever. Grab this, immediately hop over. We're going to give it an environment variable. Might not be the one that we keep. Just make sure it's not a next public one. We'll call this SingleStore pass equals string wrapped. Copy the username as well. SingleStore user equals that. Here it gives us a full connection string, which can be really handy depending on how you're connecting. But you can also grab it like this, which is all of the individual parts broken out. When I tried deploying this before, I had a couple annoying problems. Personally, I think those problems will be easiest to solve if you take all of these variables and copy them. So I'm just going to paste it like this. Obviously, these aren't actual variables, but if we do this to get started, SingleStore username, we already have that. We have SingleStore pass. We'll name this to SingleStore host, SingleStore port, password we already have, SingleStore DB name. Now we have all the environment variables. As you know, we're using T3 env, so we're going to have to move all of these there as well. SingleStore user is going to be a z.string. SingleStore pass will also be a z.string. SingleStore host, z.string. You could .url this, not the worst idea. The port's not going to come in as a string or a number. It's going to come in as a string, so we're going to say that as well. So we have all of this here, but we also have to update the runtime environment so that these values exist. We don't just magically bind them for you. It would be pretty risky and potentially break a lot of things. Thankfully, Cursor is very good at filling out template-y stuff like that. So now we have all of these included in our env variable, which means that we will safely be able to consume them, get type safety across our code base, and if we forget any of these environment variables when we go to build and deploy, we'll get an error that specifies what is missing. So much easier. Might be a couple more steps to set up, but I promise it is worth it. Now I want to make sure we do things properly in Drizzle, so we're going to search for the SingleStore Drizzle tutorial, simplifying SingleStore integration through the Drizzle ORM. This will be linked in the description as a reference, so you'll have it there if you need it, but you can also copy the code from the repo, because some of these parts will be a little bit annoying, as databases often are. First, we need to make sure we have the MySQL bindings installed. We already have Drizzle ORM and Drizzle Kit. Since the bindings for SingleStore are very similar to MySQL's, then it's usually easiest to just install that. npm install MySQL 2. Scroll down here. I just realized I never said why I'm using npm. It works pretty well, has caching, has stable versions. I've had enough random one-off problems with Bun doing things like database migrations that I just use npm. It gets out of my way. I don't have to think about it too much. But here is where things that actually matter start. We have to connect to SingleStore in Drizzle. We can do that by using the connection example they have here. They show how to get the credentials. We've already done that. We're just going to use the env. So let's go back to our code, find in here our server DB index. Hi, from Theo in the future. I spent a good bit of time talking to the SingleStore team to make sure this is as smooth as possible and to handle a couple edge cases and annoying bugs. So this is different from how I originally filmed it. We're going to stuff it in to make sure you're set up smooth and good to go. So without further ado, the main change here is we now have a pool for the connections. What that means is instead of just one connection that is being used for every person that connects to your site and every Lambda that spins up, a pool is created that can be shared amongst them. If we do this now, it'll make your lives following along way easier. First, we need to import create pool from MySQL 2/promises. Also, make sure that this is just in the server DB index file, not the Drizzle config. The Drizzle config does not work with pools. Still importing env, still importing star schema. Here we are caching the connection in the pool on global this. So in dev, when we reset the dev environment, when we make changes in other files, it's not going to have to create a new connection. It just shares the pool once. Down here, const connection equals global 4db.connection, because that's how it gets stored and binded there. And if it doesn't exist, which is what the null coalescing operator does, then we create it. And we create it with the host from our environment, port, parse int from the environment, user, password, database. In here, last two important pieces. SSL has to be an empty object. This guarantees that you won't have any issues connecting to their service and that SSL will work. Just a weird quirk in how it's configured. It's not their fault. It's MySQL 2's package being kind of weird. And then max idle 0. This will handle any timeouts and other issues when you leave your dev environment running for a while. I was having issues where we were disconnect and not reconnect. This fixes it. In the future, SingleStore is going to make it so none of this even matters, but for now, this is the solution. And now we have a working database instance, but we need to be able to push to it. We do that in the Drizzle config. And here it has its own DB credentials, its own tables filter. Tables filter is super, super handy. If you're like me and you're a cheap bastard that likes to use one free tier database for a bunch of things, looking at you guys who are using SingleStore here, you put a table filter, it will only select tables with this prefix, which is phenomenal. It means you can abuse the free tier and do a lot more things on just one database. This looks like half good. It has the schema correct. It's the dialect wrong. And if we go back to our tutorial here, you'll see it gives us a bit more context. We're going to skip the schema for now. We're going to do the dialect, SingleStore, and we're going to make sure our schema is pointing to the right place. So dialect, SingleStore, kill DB credentials. We won't be needing that. We are importing env here because by doing that, we make sure it is available when this runs. But we do need a table. So I will copy this from here. Since SingleStore isn't quite MySQL, it is its own thing that is MySQL based. You get all the things you get from traditional SQL providers, but we don't want most of them. I am just going to nuke the contents of this file because we don't really need any of it. It does import SQL from Drizzle ORM because for certain things in the default, you need that because there's no concept of created at in SQLite, which is where we started. I don't care though. We're going to do this ourselves. Why is SingleStore table deprecated? I thought I yelled at these guys to fix it. They might not have yet. The reason it's getting crossed out is because they have an at deprecated here. The function isn't deprecated. It's just that the third parameter is changing so that it accepts an array. Previously, the third argument would return an object. This is the one that's used for creating indexes. Now it has to be a function that returns an array instead of returning an object. It's a good change, but they should not have marked this as deprecated because now a lot of y'all are going to be confused when you see the line slicing through that, which it, to be frank, absolutely shouldn't be doing. This is a users table. We won't need one of these, but it is a good test to make sure everything's working as expected. So now that we have that defined, we should be able to generate a migration. I personally hate migrations. I think they're an anti-pattern. So instead of doing that, we're going to db push. pnpm run db:push. This function exists because it comes from our package.json. It's one of the nice helper scripts that's defined by T3 app. So if we scroll down here, you'll see db push just calls drizzle-kit push. Looking good. And now we have a user table in the database. To verify, we can hop back over to the SingleStore portal. Having a real UI to check things like this is very, very nice. We can hop into the SQL editor. It's loading our database. And now we see our users table. It has ID, name, and age. How nice is that? This is all now connected, at least here, but we do need it connected in production as well. The easiest way to do that, hop here, copy the environment variables, and thankfully Netlify is one of those nice platforms where when you're in the actual environment variable settings, which is under site configuration, environment variables, when you click add, you can import from an env file, but you don't have to just use the .env file itself. You just copy a section like I did, paste. You can choose where it should be accessible and also which deployment contexts. So if you want to have different environment variables for preview deployments, like the ones that came up on GitHub, separate from the deployments that are in production, you can do that. We don't need to bother with that here. We are going to use the same variables for everything, but in the future, hopefully that makes it clear how simple you can do that. Even if you wanted them all in the same database, a silly hack you could do that might actually work decently well is have tables filter not be a hard set value. Instead, make this an environment variable too. We won't be bothering, but all paths to have a lot more stuff in one database. Hit import, and now we have all of these things embedded inside of our project, which means I could make this a branch, but I'm lazy. Let's make sure all of these things look fine. The git add-p is going to be a bit tedious since we have a bunch of things in our package lock that are going to change. We could just go through. It's not too bad. I'm just going to do it. Why not? We're going through quite a cycle here. Okay, we're out of it now. Here we're back in code. All of these things look fine to me. We're importing MySQL from MySQL2/promise. That await call is weird, but it's fine. Here we have the table changes. Everything here is good. There's no unstaged files, so we'll commit -m, database added. What we haven't done yet is anything that indicates that this database is actually working. What we'll do first is change this from users to be something that represents, I don't know, files, and maybe we'll get to folders in just a bit. We'll hard code some in there so we can see them, and then make sure that we can get those rendered in the UI in some way. Normally I'd cut this part out, but I actually think it might be useful to you guys since you're not going to do this whole thing in one sitting. When I take a break from a project, it can be really hard to context shift back to where you were. So I'll often keep little notes, usually in the README, or sometimes I'll git ignore a folder that has a bunch of like what I was working on files. So in here, I'll put a little note to myself. So note from 1/26/2025. In here, I'll say just finished up connecting database, next steps. And I'll put next steps in here, which will be update schema to show files and folders, manually insert examples, render them in the UI, push and make sure it all works. So now when I come back early tomorrow, I know exactly what I was doing, what my next steps are, and I can hit the ground running without having to do quite as much work to catch my brain up to where I was. You might think, oh, I'll remember all of this. You never will. We're only human. And doing little things like this will make you a lot more effective as a human working on a project like this. I'm not going to commit that. You get the idea. I'll be back in a bit. Okay, back at it. Let's get this file structure made. So we need a way to actually store these files and folders in our database. Usually it's a good idea to take the mock data that we've been provided, in this case by our AI, to see how they're structuring things. So if we go to mock files, we'll see the structure here. The first thing I'm noticing that I'm not sure how I feel about is that folders and files are both the same type. And a file has a parent, it has these other properties, and it can be a file or a folder. But this is a weird structure because it means the URL and the size are both optional, because in the folder case, those aren't a thing, but in the file case, they are. I don't know how much I love this structure. I could hear the argument either way. I have the hot take that folders kind of suck on a fundamental level. The idea that we structure our code, our applications, our photos, our files in general like this is just something I'm not that into. I'll try to put my biases aside here. It's just, I have feelings, okay? That said, one of these is real. The other one is more like mental model. Files are real, folders are a way we think about things. So I'm going to choose to separate these out entirely. This also gives us some nice additional benefits, like a parent is always going to be a folder. We don't have to worry about linking to something that should be a folder, but it's actually a file, and now you have a weird link in your system. We can skip all of those by just separating this out. So we could separate it out immediately, or we could just go start building the model in the schema. I think it's a good idea to separate it first, just so that we can get a feel for how this differs. So we'll export. I also don't love doing interfaces for this, so we're going to name it type this time instead. Look at that. We'll leave the type folder and file in for now, just to make sure it's really clear on the other side what we're doing. One other thing I just noticed, I reverted this back to the or folder state because I couldn't help but have feelings that URL is an optional as well as size, but parent is string or null. This is important because a folder has the possibility of not having a parent because it could just be the root folder, but URL and size aren't going to exist on folder. So these are optional. This one is or null. It's very weird having all these different cases in order to try and force one generic type. As much as I love generics and types, no. There's a couple of things we get to change now that make life a lot more convenient. First, we get rid of that or case. Then I get rid of the optionals because this has to exist now. The URL for the file has to exist or it's not a real file, and it does need to have a size. We can also make parent not nullable because a file has to be in a folder. This helps clean things up a bunch. Let's grab the folders now, move them out, export const mock folders, and look at that. I will say that in the mock, it's not really clear how you'd handle a file in the root folder. Personally, I think we should have an actual root folder. So I'm going to do that. We're going to do this a little different. We'll say ID. Since ID is already string, I'll just give it the ID root. Cool. And now we can give all of these the parent ID of root. Cool. We'll leave the files as is. Not a big deal. Oh, there was a subfolder, presentations. I'm going to grab that and move it up. Cool. And everything else seems to be fine here. They all have a parent, right? Yes, cool. So now let's go back here. I'm going to change the set current folder very slightly because we'll always be in a folder now. We'll kill that. I'll make this just hard-coded to root as the default. We're going to get current files and get current folders. Forgot to import mock folders. There we go. Now you get current folders. The easiest way to handle the rendering for this, just render it above. Okay, get breadcrumbs.map. That's for the actual breadcrumbs on top. We don't care about that here. What we want is this guy. So we have a different case for folder versus file. We could break this out into a component. We're going to have to do that. I'm just going to do it now. Here's what we'll do. I like keeping the page components minimal, and we're going to have to make this one a server component in the near future anyway. So I am going to break this out now. I'll name it file row.tsx. Export. Sure. Thank you, cursor. Not the actual content we want. I'm just going to paste this here. See what this needs. So this needs a handle folder click, and the file needs a URL. These cases are different enough that I'm going to not make this a default export. We're going to separate this into file and folder and just deal with the potential style mismatch for the wrapper stuff. We could also move the wrapper up to the parent component and just render the file or folder button directly. But yeah, not worth the effort. So now we have file row. We'll call this one folder row. We'll change all these instances of file to folder. Also gonna get rid of the other case here because it will always be a folder by the time we are here if we do this right. Kill that and that. Nice and simple. Props, folder, type folder. We will import folder from the definition that we just exported from mock data. Props.folder. You know what? I'm lazy. I'm going to change this, or these two both, to folder. But instead of props.folder for all of them, const folder equals props. Nice. We do need the handle folder click function though. Does this need the ID? So there's a React philosophy thing here. Do you pass the function in a state where the child component needs to pass some data to it, or do you pass it ready for it to run? And it's my personal preference that the logic, something like this, live above, and instead of passing in a generic handle folder click, where this folder could trigger a click for a different one, that makes no sense. We should bind it when we pass to it rather than pass it the function without an identifier and then make this component handle the identification itself. It's unlikely we'll need to change it in the future, and if we do, we should change it and be very explicit about why. As such, I'm going to make this an anonymous, super simple function, void. So here, see, it's trying to suggest we pass folder ID there because that's how it's set up right now. We're going to ignore that. And instead, handle folder click, kill what we're passing here, and we'll fix the rest above. I also need to re-import the folder icon. Honestly, something I'll do quite a bit, and I'll do here just to show you guys. When I move a chunk out of a component like this, I find it's often easier to just copy all of the imports and then delete the ones you're not using. The intuition is to go the other way around, but I've actually found pretty often that this is the easiest way. Also, annoying conflict here. Folder is the Lucid React icon, but it's also mock data. Pro tip here, folder icon. When you do as up here, you can have names that conflict. Should I give that a better type? Sure, but it's mock data. We're going to ignore it for now. Gonna hop down here, make sure this is folder icon. And looks like by default, it was doing 2 dashes for this part, for the folders. We are gonna wanna put like a menu icon there in the future, but for now, I'm just gonna delete that content. Folder type is folder, folder or folder. Oh, that's because it was file before and I just like select corrected that. Cool. We don't really need that content either. I'll leave it just so that we don't break the shape of the grid. And here it's going to be, yes, we'll just do the string file. And then here we're going to change this. So it's actually the file dot size. I just realized we forgot to pass the type here, or pass the props entirely. Props, file, const file equals props. We need to make sure file is actually being imported from here. There is a generic file type in the browser, and if you're not importing yours, like if I delete that again, you'll see it's going to use the MDN standard file from node buffer. But once we import ours, it'll be good. Try to avoid these magic names if you can, so you don't have to collide with the browser's, generously speaking, weird way of doing things. Anyways, here we have the file component separate from the folder one. I'm going to delete all the folder specific stuff because we'll always be rendering file, and the hrefs file URL or hash. The reason this or had to exist before is because this type was always optional. Since we didn't know if it was a file or a folder, we didn't know if that existed. Now we do. It has to. Ta-da. One other preference thing, it'll just make the experience better. This needs to be target blank. If some of you are not familiar, target blank will make it so when you click a link, it opens in a new tab instead of overriding the URL you're currently on, which is really nice when you're opening links in something like a file viewer where you don't want to get out of your drive when you click a file, you just want to open the file. I will also say the link component might not be the best fit here. If you're not familiar with the link component, it's a cool feature in most React or other libraries that are handling your routing that allows for you to do a navigation without having to actually update the browser. If I put an A tag here and we were linking to another page, this would actually require the whole HTML gets refetched and reloaded, the JSON gets reparsed, it checks the URL and updates the page content. When you're doing a single page app or using tools like Next.js that kind of do that for you, when you have a link tag, it will let you automatically navigate without doing all the server-side stuff and just update using the JavaScript on the client. It's a really important thing for making your apps feel really smooth. It's also why you'll get a lint error by default if you use a traditional A tag. All of that said, the benefits only really matter if you're navigating to another page on your same application, on your same host URL. And the files here aren't other pages, the files are files. So this, I personally canonically think using an A tag here is good because it indicates that this isn't something that is on our domain or part of our sphere, so to speak. So I'm going to do it this way. Some people just want to standardize and only use link tags. I get it. I understand. I'm not following those rules. It looks like we have this cleaned up quite a bit now. We still have all these imports we're not using, so I'm going to start trimming those. These are all type imports, so I will put import type there so the linter gets less mad. And now we can use it over on the page. The thing this won't do is intermingle between folders and files, but I will be honest, I don't care. I think that is not a good pattern. So what we're going to do instead, we have get current files, file row. It needs a key. This is an important detail of React. When you have something that there's a bunch of in a list, React needs to know which one is which. A key makes it so React can know which one is which without having to check all of the props. Effectively essential. You'll get errors if you don't do that, so you should do that. I'm just copy pasting to do get, or I guess we already have the get current files call done above, right? Oh, we just made the functions. We didn't call them. That's a kind of silly way of doing this. We'll do this right in the future. Don't worry. This is all mock. Change this to be folder. This needs to be uppercase F folder row. Shall we see if we one-shot this? Is it time to see if we pulled this off first try? There is a type error. I want to make sure we address that. Oh, handle folder click. Look at that. I forgot I abstracted that. I did it for a reason. Handle folder click equals, my tooling is all covering the things. I want to make sure you could see this part. So handle folder click, we are passing a function, an anonymous inline defined function. And this one is going to do the navigation. We'll handle folder click to folder.id. We will likely have to change this in the near future. Remember that thing I said before about navigation? Hopefully you're getting some good foreshadowing here. Since technically this isn't links, we're not going to different pages, we're just storing it in state. This is fine for now. But no, we're going to have to gut a lot of the navigation code momentarily. One last thing is I saw it, set current folder to null. We don't want that to be null anymore. We want this to be root. And if I did this all correctly, we should be able to refresh and see that I forgot to spin up the dev environment. npm run dev, fingers crossed this time. Is it just working? Did we first try that? No way. Let's go double check by making some change to our mock files. We'll just go give one an empty ID. Oh wait, no, we don't have those. It has to be root. So now resume PDF's in root. If we did this right, it thinks we're in resume.pdf. Okay. Oh no, that's gave it the ID of root. That's why. We need to give it the parent of root. We all make stupid mistakes, okay? At least we know my code is running. Yeah, look at that. It does mean that the breadcrumbs are breaking. Let's see how those work so we can fix them. Get breadcrumbs, mock files.find, haha. Mock folders. And they can still have null parent, which is annoying, but we'll handle that with root. And now it says root there. That's fine. I'll deal with the consequences of my decisions later. Oh no, did I put an infinite loop in here somewhere? There's no way, right? If I just comment out the breadcrumbs section, will it stop walking up? Because it was doing fine just a second ago. Remember I was so pumped that I one-shot this? What is going on? Yeah, when in question, rmrf.next, pnpm run dev. Wait a little bit longer because we're rebuilding the dev environment. And in just a moment, we should be good to go. And yeah, we are. Nice. Still not quite sure what went wrong there. I'm going to do this correctly now. This really shouldn't be a function. Hell, none of these really should be. These should all be memoized data gets. I'm going to be extraordinarily lazy, and now we'll turn on React Compiler later. I'll do this the right way the first time. We're going to do const breadcrumbs equals use memo. Wrap this whole guy, but it needs an array for when it should or shouldn't re-render. It looks like it's missing other things, or did I forget to import use memo? That as well. Cool. I guess mock folder, since an import doesn't really matter, it stays stable. Now we have our breadcrumbs, and I can kill this. So we just map over what we actually care about. Uncomment. And now, okay, I had to have introduced some stupid infinite loop here. Oh, well, current ID is not equal to null. I'm dumb, okay? You'd think that these AI tools would catch these mistakes. Yep, that's all it was. And now we have the fully nested, fully functioning, going in and out. Ta-da. Do think we need to add one additional filter because there is a folder that has a parent that is a different folder, right? Yeah, get current folders, folder parents, current folder. Then that should just be working. I'll go over to the mock folders. Oh, yeah, I didn't put the other one in, or I might have command Z'd it out. Come on, there we go. Thank you, cursor. So I'm adding one more mock folder here that has a different parent. This one has a parent of 3, just to make sure nesting works because those things can get a little messy. Presentations. Cool, we made it in. We don't have any files that have this as a parent, but at least we can go that deeply nested and things appear to be working how they should. How nice. Cool. This is in a good state to commit. I personally like to commit a tiny bit aggressively just to make sure we don't lose important context. I am going to commit all of this because it is nice having my brain dump. Normally I'd put that in a different folder, but I don't care. Here's where I made those changes with the null case. There's the mock data changes. But you'll notice we didn't get file row because again, get add -p doesn't include it. Get add -a instead. Get commit -m, update mock data. Should have also included that we broke out the file row. Not that big a deal. But now we have a rough idea of how to structure this. Let's hop back over to our schema. Something I personally like to do, and to be honest, normally I do this when I have more screen real estate, is I'll pull up my mock data just right up next to my actual schema and go through it one piece at a time to make sure we do it right. So we're going to export const files equals, and as per usual, cursor's very smart and trying to do all the work for me. We're going to do the work ourselves though. So we are naming this files _ table. That is an acceptable name for what it is. We'll have an ID that's a primary key. We want this to be something that auto increments. I know int IDs seem like a really bad idea, but if you're in a MySQL world where everything runs really fast, they're actually a very good idea. And I found I've regretted not having int IDs more times than I've regretted having them. Files have a name, which is text, which is a string, size, which is an integer size, a URL, which is text named URL, the parent, which is an int named parent. This seems too good to be true. Looks like it's going well. We do need to add one thing here, which is an index. We'll say, I'm going to call this temp table when I do these inline definitions. I don't like it colliding with the name we have there. We're going to return. And the return here for your indexes, the syntax is different as was mentioned before with that deprecation warning. If we hop in here, go to SingleStore tables, type definition, or maybe we'll just hover over this one so we get that error case. Cool. Here we are. And it shows us in the deprecated section, the old and the new API. The new API wants us to have index custom name on t.id. I like the naming there, so we'll follow that. Index from drizzle ORM SingleStore. Parent index. Do we need the dot using? I don't think we do. Yeah. On t.parent. Now we are explicitly saying we want to index this on the parent, which might not sound like a big deal, but what this enables is now it is very easy for us to look up all the files based on their parent folder ID. So when we go to a folder, we want to grab all the files that are in that folder quickly. If we have to look up through the whole database just to find that one folder or that one file, not realistic. But now we don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to be extraordinarily lazy. Okay, if I was really being lazy, I'd be pressing Command K right now, but I am holding back. I just copy pasted, and we're going to make the folders table very similarly. I'll still have a name. I won't have a size or a URL. I don't think it needs any of the other things now. Cool. It's basically just the file one, but simpler. Parent is int parent, and we need this to be optional. I guess everything else should actually be not null, because that one can be null. I'll say name has to be not null. I'm going to go back up here and say that files can't have a null parent. Cool. Yeah, nice and simple. This all seems like it should work. I am going to get rid of the users table now because we don't really need it. And the only reason we had it is as a default example. And we're going to be using Clerk for our auth, which is a much simpler place to have your auth stuff. It's where I need to join against users anyways. I usually just need the user ID. That is a thing worth including. We could just do a migration later, but at some point, these are going to need a owner ID to indicate who owns the file and who owns the folder, usually the person who uploaded. Well, let's just make sure this all works. pnpm run db push. Changes applied. Look at that. And we can confirm that this worked by going back over to SingleStore. I'm going to hop over to my deployments, my Drive tutorial, connect SQL editor. And in just a sec, we should see, look at that, files table, folders table, and it didn't drop the users table. Yeah, probably fine. I also noticed it's not using the prefixes that we have defined. I found our mistake. I forgot a piece. So we're not going to be using the SQLite table creator. We're going to use the SingleStore table creator. Haha. And now we're going to use our helper create table function here instead of the SingleStore table one. Change this to be create table. And do the same down here. And the reason we did this is to make sure that whenever a new table is created, that we are using our prefix in order to make sure that Drizzle knows which tables it can or cannot touch. It might seem annoying, like why are we putting prefixes on everything? And so we can have multiple projects on the same database. It's so nice to have, when you have a database as performant as what they offer at SingleStore, to just host a couple side projects in it. Just give them all a different prefix and you're good to go. Now let's make sure quick by pnpm run db push. Changes applied. And my guess is it's not going to delete those other tables because as far as it's concerned, those tables are not within its worldview. It only cares about the tables that it owns, so to speak, which are the ones that have that prefix. And as I guess, we have the Drive tutorial files table and the Drive tutorial folders table. It won't delete these ones because they don't have the matching prefix, so it doesn't know it can. If I was to go rename one of the other Drive tutorial ones, then it would be willing to delete it. Or if I removed files table from the code base, a push would get rid of it. These ones aren't being gotten rid of because they might be a part of another project. So sorry, I did that wrong. You can go delete them by hand. You could even comment out the tables filter here, which I'll do quick to show you guys. pnpm run db push. Oh, I remember this one. This is because we can't have int. It's funny because it's in the example they gave, but their example is bad. Since SingleStore is built for scale, int is the wrong type for IDs. It might work when you first push, but the type that they actually use for your IDs by default is a big int. So we're going to move over here, change this to big int, make sure we're importing that from SingleStore. Do the same thing down here. Cool. That means the parents have to be big ints as well. Mode number unsigned true. I don't know if you even pass the name field here. What's this mad about? name and then mode. Oh, I got the order wrong. That's kind of silly. So this needs to have the name in front, in this case, parent, then the options. It's silly. The type error there was unintuitive because the 2 arguments is what changed whether or not it needs that. I should do the same for these two. We'll give them both the name ID. Cool. Should all be fixed now. I'm happy we did this test because that would have been really confusing to run into later. Still has the modifying type, which is not supported. I did run into this before. Thankfully, ran into this now because it's a lot less scary to just drop all the things. Oh, it did drop the other ones when we got rid of the prefix thing like I predicted. That's cool at least. Drop table, drive, tutorial. Okay, it's been a bit since I did raw MySQL. Looks like backticks are the mistake I was making. Nice. Now that's gone, and we'll also drop folders table. Cool. Those are both dropped. I'm going to refresh here to make sure they're both gone. Yeah, we have no tables now. Hop back over here. pm run db push. Bada bing, bada boom. Now we have a properly set up schema for most of the stuff that we need to do. We have the files table and the folders table. Has IDs that are big ints. Everything expects the right types everywhere. We're in a good spot to get moving. So let's get moving. We need this data. We need to have it in the database in order to test and make sure things are working. There's a lot of ways we could do that. We could write a manual backfill or seed in SQL. We could write it in TypeScript. We could go and hang out in the data view and write the SQL in there ourselves. We could even use a tool like Outerbase or Drizzle to take advantage of Studio and play with it there. But we also have the data here. Why don't we just use it? So I'm going to make us a new route. This is a thing I do a lot because it just makes life easy. We're going to make a sandbox route. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to teach you guys a little bit of the fun things we can do with server components. Export default function sandbox page. We're going to make a div in here that is our seed function. And here we're going to have a form. Form will have a submit button. Cool. I'm going to make this look a little nicer. Not much nicer, to be clear. Class names flex call, gap4. Cool. Good enough for me. We are going to need the DB, so I guess we can import that now. We also want the mock data. Why is Cursor so many steps ahead of me? I swear I haven't written this code before. It's just pretty smart. Action equals async function. And this, we have to write use server. This is going to be the first time a lot of y'all have seen use server. Hopefully you've seen some of my videos about it, but I'll assume you haven't because it's a big assumption. Use server is not like use client. Use client tells the React compiler, bundler, and all the things in Next.js that the JavaScript in this file needs to go to the client. Use server does not say that this JavaScript needs to go on the server. Use server says we need the client to be able to call this function. What it means here is on submit of this form, whatever we do in here will be called. So if I put a console.log here, it says sup nerds, and we go to this page that I made, localhost 3000 sandbox. We click the seed function. I'll do it with my console open. Nothing. What's going on? Well, that function is being called in the server. So see all these sup nerds posts on sandbox? If you know the inner workings of the browser and the post and all these fun HTTP functions, whenever you create an action like this, it creates a path for a post to the route that the component's mounted on to call this function. So when you post to /sandbox, since this function exists in the sandbox component tree, it's accessible to components mounted in that route. If you had 3 of them, it would know which one is which by hiding little identifiers inside of the form itself so that it knows which form to call and which action to call, depending on which form you submitted. Because you're not hitting a different route when you have 3 forms on the same page. The action binding just makes sure it goes the right place. It's such a cool pattern. And once the benefits of it click, it's hard to go back. I miss it all the time on the code bases I have that don't get to use these things. We need to insert these things. We'll see how Cursor does with this autocomplete here. db.insert. If you're not familiar with Drizzle's syntax, it's not like a traditional ORM where you would db.query.folders and have autocomplete for all the different types. It's a little more like SQL, where the way we write things is going to feel a lot more like SQL. Here we have folders, which is imported from our schema. And we are saying that we are inserting these values, and we're going to do the same for files. But there's going to be a problem here. And the problem, I'm assuming, is that this doesn't map right. And I am correct. What we're going to do here, mockfolders.map folder. We're going to strip out all the things we don't care about. Also, pro tip, little JavaScript thing. Since the syntax to define an inline function uses brackets, but so do objects, great design decision, we can do this in line still by wrapping object in parens and this immediately return what we want to return, which in here is going to be name folder.name. Parent is folder.parent. The problem here is that our IDs here are all strings and the IDs for what we're about to do are not. Yeah, see the problem here? We're going to do this nice and lazy because it is mock data. We're going to give them all index. Index not equal to 0. And if so, we'll say the parent is 1. Otherwise, the parent is null. Now we have a decent starting space here. These are terrible things to do if this is the actual thing that you're shipping to users, but we're still in the mock data world right now. So we're going to .map the files. Same deal with the parens, then the open close brackets. And here we're going to do the same, index +1. We're going to ignore the parents because those are all going to be wrong. I'm just going to do index mod 3 so that they all end up in random folders that make sense. That has to be +1 because 1 is the lowest index we have. That is fine. What is this mad about? Oh, is it because size is a string? We'll just give size a number of 5,000. Doesn't mean anything. But what we've done here, which is really cool, is I created a function on the server that could be run like a seed or something. But instead of doing that, I now have a UI that I can use to see things. So if we store the results here, const folder insert, cool. And we'll do const file insert and log the results of both of those. If I recall, the type's not super interesting when you do an insert like this. Yeah, it's just the raw query result, which has nothing in it. But at the very least, when we go back and check, we should see that it finished. We affected 6 rows with the file one, and we affected 5 rows with the folder one, which means now, if we go back over to the customer portal, we'll select star from, get the whole name just right, drive, tutorial, files, table, run it, and here we are. Look at that. We got actual files coming from the database. This is a very good time to commit. We now have this all there. I'm not going to commit the sandbox because we only needed that there. There's a lot of different ways to handle a sandbox. You could have it be a route that's only in dev, otherwise it throws. You could have it be a thing that's not in the code base at all. You just pull it from stash. We're just going to pull it from stash. So I'm going to commit this first. DB model working. Escape the exclamation point. Stash the rest. Oh, we can't stash the new file. One more pro tip. If you add it, then you stash it, you can absolutely stash a new file. Cool. So we saw the data here. We have it all in our code base, but we're not actually showing it in the UI yet. We're still using the mock data here. So we should first and foremost fix that. Delete, delete. We are going to need more types and a much better method for querying things, which is all stuff we'll do in the near future. The one concern I have here is that since this is a use client component setting things as state, we can't just call things the way I want to. I want to be able to just do async functions in here and get the data that I need. So I'm going to do this the extraordinarily lazy way. I'm going to copy paste page TSX to be drive contents.tsx. We're going to pass this files and folders, props, files, type of, files. The typing here is going to be annoying. I really want to do this right. We'll just infer select on it. And same with folders. To import that, we'll rename those later. But what the infer select here does is it lets you infer from the actual definition from the table what this is, which is really nice because these should be arrays. Cool, figure that out. Now I can just query for these in the parent and have them down here. I'm not even going to do, we don't have it in the URL, so I should do the filtering here. Do I do this all right the first time? No, I'm not. I'm going to be lazy this first time. We'll come fix it in a bit. We're going to change this so it's not get current files and get current folders. It'll instead be props.files and props.folders. Props.folders.map. Props.files.map. Okay. So you're seeing some type errors here. That's because the mock data and the actual data aren't perfectly aligned, and this old folder type is not what we want here. I don't want to keep doing this type of infer select. I'll do the type of for both of them for now, but in a little bit we will fix it. So now we have type of folders and files. We don't need that anymore. We're just using these as types, which is important because we don't want to import backend stuff on the front end because this file row is almost certainly going to be a client component. We could even indicate it on top. I'll deal with that later. The important detail in order to make sure this never goes wrong, a habit we should get into as soon as possible, import server only. This doesn't actually do anything in the traditional sense. Like this doesn't change how Next gets compiled. What it does is if we import this on the client, and we shouldn't, putting the import server only guarantees that we'll get at the very least a runtime error in our attempts, ideally a build error, so that it's much less likely we accidentally import something that should be on the server on the client. And when your code base makes it this easy to hop between the two, a little bit of concern is warranted. But now that we've made these changes, where it has type of file, insert, select, and folder, nothing else needed to change because all the types were, for the most part, interchangeable. Handle folder click is still expecting a string, even though now it is a number. And the root is no longer string root. It is now the number 1. Obviously, all of this code needs to change. But for now, this is fine. Mock folders.find, this should have been folder. And a folder ID, current ID. Current ID should be a number, though. What is folder.id then? Oh, it's still mock folders. There's the problem. I'm a dumbass. Ta-da. And current folder still matters, but props.folders matters even more. Set current to 1 because we are nasty hard coding individuals. Import type here. Kill the mocks. And now we get to hop back to page TSX, which looks familiar. We're going to make it look very unfamiliar in just a moment. Delete everything here. I didn't say when I did it, but I deleted the use client on top, which makes this a server component. As I was saying before, use server does not make something a server component. Use server makes it so a function defined on the server could be called on the client. What makes something a server component is that nowhere above its mount does a use client boundary occur. Since this is the page, which is mounted in the layout, this is a server component. And any children this has that aren't marked as use client will also be server components. What this means is we can do things in here, and these things will only happen on the server, like selecting from files and folders. These are going to be bad. Again, these names suck. We'll deal with them in a bit. Files as files schema. Folders folder schema. Files schema. And folders schema. And now we're going to change what we are returning here to be drive contents, which I should rename this to drive contents. Just make the naming clear and consistent throughout. Manually auto import. Google Drive clone, and if we did this all right, localhost cannot add new command when connections in a closed state. Might just be the database connection died. Looks like that's all it was. And now we have all of the folders, all of the contents, and none of this works because none of the filtering is set up yet. But we are getting actual files and folders from our actual database in the UI now. That's a huge step. We're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate by putting it up. Because again, it's important to be sure that everything is still working in our production environment so we know we didn't break anything stupid. So we're going to commit this as drive contents being rendered. Git push. No. I remembered to escape the exclamation point last time. I forgot it this time. And now that we're back in GitHub, we see the little pending, which shows the CI, but the CI is not the only thing we care about. In just a moment, we'll also have a build going on. Oh, is the CI upset? Look at that. Remember the thing I said about setting this up early is important? What's cool here is we can see when our CI failed us. And here it's a lint failure. I was about to say this might be breaking the build on Netlify, but we did add those environment variables relatively early. Yeah, they're all here. So theoretically, our build up here should be fine. Looks like this one's going well. It is deploying, and the updated site is live, which means if we go to it, ta-da, everything's rendering here. No weird issues or obscure bullshit that we have to deal with. It's really good having a production environment that is working so that you can quickly check when things go right or wrong to make sure. We're going to be adding a couple other things in the near future, including Posthog, auth with Clerk, and file upload with UploadThing. And it'd be really annoying if it works on a machine and it doesn't work there. As long as we go piece by piece, it won't be that bad at all. I want to fix the CI builds though. So we're going to hop into the env example. I'm going to grab all of these. We're not going to actually use these values. It's just easier to have the value on the left side. I'll leave that one. I'll put not a password. Here I'll put something, .SingleStore. And now it's close enough that you'll know if your like values are right or wrong if you see this as the actual example. And it will force this all to pass because the environment variables will exist and Zod won't be mad. So we'll add that, git commit, update env example, git push. And now if we hop back over to GitHub, this shouldn't fail immediately like it did before. And it looks like the build passed. How nice is that? We are back to having clean CI, and we can see when things were and weren't working. It is good to have CI. Don't sell yourself short. It's almost always worth it. And it's not a whole lot of work to have a quick type check. Not saying add a ton of unit tests or anything. I'm just saying be realistic. So let's go back over to our to-do list, see how we're doing. We updated the schema. We manually inserted the examples. We rendered them in the UI, and we pushed and made sure it all works. This note's no longer valuable. I'm just going to kill it. But we did set up the database and the data model, so I'm going to check that. And it looks like our next step's pretty clear. Move folder open state to the URL. That's actually what I was running into just before with the weird folder states. Sounds like a really good next step. So we're going to commit the README changes. README to do, updated. We can push this. It will trigger a build even though nothing actually changed. So I'm just going to wait on that. We don't need to run our CI and our deployments on every change. You could block it with some manual thing or put in a branch or something. Whatever. We'll just push it when we get there. This is a one-person project still. So now that this is all done, let's get moving our state around. The first thing we need is a URL pattern that lets us do this. Having one page is not going to give us a URL pattern. We need to start doing things the next way. So we need a route parameter, something that's in the URL that indicates which folder we're in. And obviously enough, it's not realistic for us to write every single folder ID ever into our app directory. So instead, we're going to give it a route param. I'm going to name it simply so that we have a subroute f/. This is just my chosen name. This will mean that we're on localhost 3000 /f/. And then we'll do the param, which is folder ID /page.tsx. If you didn't know this in VS Code, Cursor, and all the VS Code forks, you can right-click New File, and if you put slashes, it'll make all the folders. It's super handy. So we have this in here. I'm going to just yoink this guy and paste it. But now we have page parameters. Go up to folders, up to drive contents. Don't know what happened there. What we need to change now is the params. So this thinks we have props folder ID number. No, we don't. We have props params. And params will have a folder ID. That should be a number. We'll confirm this. Console.log props.params.folder ID. And we will go to the page localhost 3000 /f/. We don't want that long number. We just want 1. Getting that connection closed state error. Notice this happens if you don't hit the database for too long. Connections timeout. It's annoying, but it's life. Won't happen in a production environment, thankfully. Okay, that seems to have worked. What's going on here? Oh, Next.js changes. This is actually a fun one and gives me an opportunity to explain one of my favorite things going on in the Next.js and React world. Technically speaking, since this param could be anything, we can't generate this page. This page can't be static, because if this page was static, it would only have the right content for one person or one route. And we can't generate a static page for every single thing in our folders. That would just be insanity. What we're going to do instead, which is a very nice, clever trick, is we're going to indicate that this is a dynamic route. But how do we indicate that it's dynamic? Do I have to put some use dynamic or something? There's an interesting way to do this now. Const params equals await props.params. This is going to give us a type error because we define props, which is kind of the most annoying part here. I think we can actually just do it like that. Nope, it's going to be mad that that's not a promise. So we're going to make it one. The interesting thing Next.js recently did is they made it so all indicators that a route is dynamic or user specific are now async. And by awaiting, like we did here, we are now indicating to the reconciler, compiler, runtime, all of these layers, that this route should be treated as dynamic from here down. We're not using the fancy feature that this is for, which is dynamic IO. Check out my video, The Magic Powering Next.js, if you want to hear a lot more interesting detail about what this all is and how it works. The practical thing you need to know is if we're doing something that is unique to this specific user or page experience, that an await indicates to the browser and indicates to Next.js, hey, this is dynamic. We can't just serve a static cached asset. So now we have that. Everything else should work how we expect. I'm going to refresh the page, go back to the terminal, and we see 1, which is exactly what we want because that is the thing we have here. Folder ID, number. We could also do a quick throw check just to make sure, because I can put something that isn't a number here, like hello. And it's going to log hello. We don't want it to log hello. We want it to log a number. The best thing here to do would be validate it with Zod. I don't think it actually comes through as a number. I think it comes through as a string. We'll log the type of. I'm effectively positive this is how it works, but yes, it is a string. Cool. It says it's a string. We want to make sure it's actually a number. So let's get a number. Safe params equals z.object. Look at that. We're going to use Zod, which we already have for the environment stuff, which allows us to validate something really simply. Here we're going to parse this object and make sure folder ID is a valid number. This will parse it as a string and put a number out on the other side. Now if we console log safe params, expect the number receive string. I lied. I hate to say it, I'm a little disappointed in Zod. I don't know why I didn't know this was a thing, but they don't really have a way to validate that a string is a valid number, which explains a lot of weird stuff I've run into in the past. But because of that, I'm just gonna grab this part here, and we're gonna use that separately. Here, we'll do parsed folder ID is parseInt params.folder ID. And if this is invalid, I'll handle that case. We'll delete everything else here. Cool. This still thinks it's a number when it's really a string, so I will fix that. And if the result is invalid, we could throw, we could error, we could redirect them to a different route, but the easiest thing is just return invalid folder ID. And now, if we refresh this, that appears to all work. And if I change this to an invalid folder ID, like hello, invalid folder ID. Look at that. We do need to actually use the folder ID though, because right now we're just selecting all things from folder schema. We'll do a dot where. Remember, it is effectively just going to be the experience you'd have writing SQL. So we need to say where equal using the drizzle equal folder schema dot parent parsed folder ID. So what this is saying is basically in SQL terms, we are selecting from folder schema where the folder schema dot parent is equal to parsed folder ID. And remember, if we go back here, parent is indexed. So we are checking against the index. It will be a hell of a lot faster. And we should do the same for files. Where, basically the exact same code. The one thing we won't have here is the actual folder that we are in. So if we wanted to display that in the UI somewhere, we're not really getting that part. We're also not getting the breadcrumbs, which SQL and relational DBs are fun. I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. But now, if we go back to here, you'll see we have a different set of things than we did before. Clicking's still not going to do anything because that's all just going into state management, but we are now seeing different content on different things. So if I change this to F-2, we are now in a different folder that has different contents. And if I go back, we go back to the other one. We now have URLs that match the different content on the page, which is awesome. I am going to quickly change the home page just so that we know that it is the home page. I'm going to make this not async. I'm going to delete pretty much everything in here. I'm going to say home page now. Delete all the content here. Div, please subscribe. You're 2 hours in, you nerd. And as always, when you have apostrophes, my preference is to string wrap. Kill all the imports. We don't need them anymore. Localhost 3000. Please subscribe. You're 2 hours in, you nerd. Get status. Get add-p. We have our trimmed up home page. Again, we sadly have to -a for the new pages. Commit. Nested routing. It's not really nested routing. Wrong term. Folder IDs are now handled via the routes. You can go check in Netlify or on GitHub. I prefer GitHub just so we can also see when our CI is done. Let's see if our deploy started over here. It is indeed building. And the site is live. So if we go back and we refresh, we'll see our boring new homepage. Hopefully you're already subscribed by now. /f/1. And now we have actual content. None of these actually do anything yet. We'll fix that next. But at the very least, we now have most of the core parts working. We've made a lot of progress, that much is for sure. What do you do when you make a lot of progress? You write down what you did and what you are realizing you need to do next. We moved the folder open state to the URL, but there is more we have to do. So it's the 27th. I'm going to write down the random notes of the things I'm realizing we still need to do. Change folders to link components. Right now, the folders have an on click, which is never the way you want to do navigation. But now that we have actual navigation, it's absolutely not how we want to do it. I guess I should remove all client state, because none of that state needs to be on the client anymore. And honestly, it doesn't belong there. I also want to clean up the database and data fetching patterns. There are some things I've been doing more and more as I build big code bases with tools like Drizzle, just to make it easier to keep track of what's what. These will just, you'll get it when you see it. Real homepage. I think that's it for like the immediate, like based on the stuff that we just did, what I want to change. And I'm sure auth and file uploading are going to be their own rabbit holes. I will also add analytics. Before I forget that, it's not a real product if it doesn't have analytics. Like straight up, if I didn't put Posthog on a product I shipped, it's because I don't actually care about that product. It is essential. And if it was hard to do, it might be a different conversation, but thankfully it's quite easy. This all looks good. Commit, readme update, git push. Cool. We're back. I'm tempted to add auth, but I should fix the routing at least a little bit first. So let's do that. Right now, the links are the problem because they're not really links. They're just on clicks on these buttons with the handle folder click. Ideally, these will link to the right place, which is /f/the file ID. It's actually, hopefully, pretty easy fix. I change this to be a link. We don't want the on click anymore. Oh, look at that. Cursor is smarter than me. See that? href equals /f/folder.id. The one thing it is not smart about is it's trying to import from Lucid React. It's probably my biggest annoyance with the Lucid icon package. It always will auto import even when you don't want it to. I want the link component, not the link icon. I wish they all just had an icon at the end of the name, but nothing can be perfect, you know? Cool. Now that that's handled, we can remove the handle folder click prop. And if this was all done correct, we should be able to just go back here. Click one of these. Oh, that's the actual deployment version. I should have checked the URL. Localhost 3000, forgot /f/1. We'll make the homepage useful in a little bit. Now when I click one, look at that. There's nothing in that folder, but we can go back and see all the different folders. So that was a pretty easy fix, but it did kind of break the breadcrumbs. So we need to fix that too. Gonna quickly check this here. Make sure all that client state is gone. Hop back to file row. Drive contents is where this all comes from. Get rid of the state. Get rid of this. We do have to handle the breadcrumbs, which won't be super fun. I'm just going to comment this out, or we'll just make it an empty array for now so it has something. It's mad that we didn't give it a type. That's fine. We'll say unknown array for now, just so it shuts up. We still have to deal with it. It has the folder IDs, folder name. We'll handle all that in just a minute. And we can get rid of this handle folder click. Nice. This makes this component way simpler. This doesn't really do anything. We'll make this also a link from next link. We'll change the href. I don't like slash. We're just going to do /1 for now because, again, the root does have a folder ID. I'm second guessing that decision as I go further. Honestly, it does make some things a lot easier, but it makes others a lot more annoying. Breadcrumbs, it doesn't know what they are, so this is all just wrong. I will change this to be link, even though the ID doesn't exist yet. I dislike the variant ghost because we're using a link here. I think we could use button type as link with shadcn, but for now, I'm going to be lazy. Just have this be folder.id. Even though we don't have the ID here yet, it'll error, but at least it will work. Since this is an empty array, it's not going to hit any of this code anyways. At the very least, it gets rid of the type errors. This is working as expected. I can go to a folder. I can click here and it goes back. If I remembered /f/ here. And now when we click my drive, it brings us back. How cool is that? This is a big enough fix that I personally think it's worth committing. So we will do that. Git status, git add -p. Yes, 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 yes. All looking good. Commit this as move off client state and use real links for navigation. Cool. We'll push just to get that up on the server, but we want to actually get our work done here. The one last thing for this to work properly is to handle breadcrumbs. Right now, we don't have them. This component can't get them because this is currently a client component. It's on the client side. And generally, you should put all your data fetching in one place if you can, especially for your server data. Or at the very least, we should do it in parallel. Thankfully, we can do that here. If we hop over to not the home page TSX, but the folder page TSX here, we'll see we have this validator we're not using anymore. But what we're here for is different. I want to handle a couple things. First off, we're not doing these fetches at the same time. There's no reason not to. Right now, we're waiting for folders to be completed before we do it. We're also waiting for files to be completed before we do it, even though we're not using folders for this. So let's fix that first, and I think you'll see why in a sec. We're going to change this from folders to folders promise. We'll change this from files to files promise. And then const folders, comma, files equals await promise.all. What this does is lets us go to the next code without waiting. If we had an await here, it would block when we were fetching the folders. We wouldn't be able to start fetching the files. Now these can happen at the same time in parallel. It doesn't seem like too big a deal, but we're about to add a function that will make it a bit more of a thing. So now we need function get all parents. You start with a folder ID. Parents is an empty array. And while current ID isn't 1, actually, we'll go a step further because 1's not going to be the hard-coded root forever. I'll say when current ID is not equal to null, we'll push the current folder ID, and then the new current ID is set to be whatever this is. I don't love that being ID because I don't want to push current ID here. What I want to push is the actual folder content because I want to have that array of folder content. So I'm going to put an async function here. And instead of immediately pushing, we're going to get const folder equals await db dot select from folder schema where equal folder schema dot id current ID. Awesome. Now we have folder, we're pushing it, and we're going to set current ID to be folder dot parent. Since this can be null, it is possible for it to be null. This is erroring because current ID is always number. So if we change this to be number or null, do I need to make that? No, that was right. Nice try, cursor. But folder.parent. Oh, no. That is right. Is there a select? Select distinct. That will give us back just one, right? Nope. A bit annoying, but we can solve that by just doing what it showed there. Folder 0, question mark dot parent, and also we would want this here. And also we'll put an edge case handler here. If no folder, then we want to throw that the parent folder was not found. Now we have parents.push folder, Current ID is folder 0 $.parent. Things like this are where relations are both good and bad. Since each folder can have a parent and its parent could have a parent, we have to crawl all the way up. So if we did this in a way where it was blocking other requests, this would have taken way longer. But since we made the change here where folders and files are broken out, now I can do const parents promise equals get all parents. This needs the parse folder ID. And now we have this other promise, which I can put there. Now we have parents. And if we hover over, we'll see the type, which is ID number, name string, parent number or null array, which is a match that is perfectly matched to what we would get out of the folder's promise. If we hover over that, we'll see ID, number, name, string, parent, number, or null. Now we have the same for both, which means we have everything we need to put parents in here. We don't have it on the other side though, so let's quickly fix that. So you have to say at the top of your component what it expects, parents, and we'll have it be the exact same type as folders because we are getting them effectively the exact same way. Now instead of breadcrumbs, it's named parents. And down here, I can do props.parents.map. Event handlers cannot be passed to client component props. Okay, where is this handle upload coming from? Oh, I removed the use client from drive contents, which is why this handle upload is broken. I can just put the use client back on top for now. We can fix that in the future because we don't have any client-side behaviors in here. And when I say client-side behavior, what I mean is like something that happens after the page loads, like an effect that changes the content of the page or an on-click that runs when the user clicks. Any functionality where we expect a code to run on the user's device, not just show them some HTML, that is when you would pull in use client. But right now, the only thing this does is the silly handle upload alert. If we broke this out into its own component, an upload button component, which I'm sure we'll do in a bit, we could have the handle upload functionality separate in there, and then this drive contents would not have to send any JavaScript to the client at all. But now we fix that. If we go back over to the browser, look at that. It says root because we still have that root folder. It's fine. We'll find solutions to that later. But now the breadcrumbs all work. I can, oh, it looks like they're backwards. That's actually kind of funny. If we go here, yeah, the breadcrumbs are backwards. I know how that happened, but it's still funny. It's because we're pushing to the array. I'm going to drop a little more React wisdom. Your instinct might be here to just reverse it. Usually in React, that's a really bad idea. So I did parents.reverse, and this was something we got from state. It's actually reversing the original array. .reverse sucks for that reason. Instead of reverse, we could use toReversed, which is a new browser standard that I guess my TypeScript instance isn't aware of. You can probably get the TypeScript config to stop complaining if you want to. toReversed doesn't modify the original array, it creates a new one. All of that said, generally speaking, when you modify data this way, especially like this, if this component was running on client, this would create a new array every single time this code is checked, which is not what we want to do. The right way to do this is to change how the data is being created. So right now we are parents.pushing this. We change it to parents.unshift. Unshift puts it on the front instead of the back. So if we go back here now, click presentations, now it is appearing in the correct order. I did notice one thing, which is every time I load this page, the order has a chance of being different, which is fixable by using a consistent sort order. That's something that we do here, but I want to break this out first. All of that said, look at how clean and focused this code is. We create the different promises for the different data that we need. Folders promise, files promise, parents promise. Then we wait for all of them to be done. Then once all of them are done, this runs. Ideally, I would try catch wrap this whole section, because if parents promise fails because it hits a bad state, like let's say you delete a folder in between the one you're in and where you came from, that would break. And this would cause the whole page to error out. Unrealistic case, good problem to deal with if you run into it. Ideally, your deletion logic prevents those states from being hittable though. But you do have to think about like, where do we handle error states? What error states can happen and how do we prevent them from happening? And if they do happen, how do we recover from that? All problems you should deal with, but this is just a tutorial on how to pull everything together. That feels a tiny bit too far to go here. That said, this all works relatively well, so we're going to commit it. Get rid of the unused parts. Kill breadcrumbs. We now pass parents. props.parents.map. We defined that getAllParents function. And then in here, we have the await promise.all call. We'll commit this as breadcrumbs fixed. I keep doing the non-escaped exclamation point. Cool. Now we have working breadcrumbs. Something has been bothering me, and I want to fix this because it is a good example for some patterns. There's two things. First, I want to rename the things in the schema because files and folders are not great names for what this is, which is the model in our database. So the quickest fix for this is good old F2. If you're hovering over a variable and you press F2 on your keyboard, it lets you rename it. And it's not just like, oh, I'm changing the name of this variable right here. It changes the name anywhere it's being consumed. So we can change this. There's a lot of different patterns. Honestly, I think files table with an underscore is relatively clear. I might even change it from files table to file table. I don't necessarily love the plural. There's a lot of debate on whether or not your table should be named plural or singular. I already did it, so we'll stick with plural. I want to emphasize that I think the debate is silly by not making a decision. Now it's been renamed. You'll see it modified other files because, again, it does change everywhere it's being imported because VS Code is smart enough due to TypeScript and the type system that it is using to monitor where everything is being used and imported. It can change it in all the different places you're importing it. And if I get status, you'll see it went into all these different files, all 4 of them, and made the right change. Better names for schema. Not going to push just yet because I want to do another similar change. So now we have a schema that has better names for things, but we're just kind of querying data wherever we feel like. If we look in this component, for example, I just kind of wrote a bunch of SQL stuff in here. This one's its own broken out function. The other ones are just in line. While this is super cool for getting started and seeing how all the parts work, ideally your data access layer is a separate thing from your components. Your data access layer could be its own separate backend API. Your data access layer could be another folder or a package in this code base. There's a lot of ways to create these layers. I'm going to choose the simplest one, which is to move it to a different file in the code base where all of our queries will live. This makes everything simpler, from making sure you're reusing things that exist, to code review, to keeping an eye on the surface area where risk might exist. Having one location where all of these calls exist is a generally very good thing. I'm just going to name this queries.ts. It's going to live in server/db. And once again, I'm going to do my favorite lazy trick, which is to go to the file that has the things I want in it, just copy and paste the whole file over, even though we don't want most of what's in here. Certainly not any of the JSX parts, because this is not a JSX file. So we're going to delete all of these parts because we don't need any of them. Now we're going to make this, oh, look at that, cursor being smart. Export async function, get folders. And instead of waiting here, I'm just going to return. Even though we're just instant returning, I'm not going to switch it over to an arrow function simply because we're going to do more stuff in the future. Also, a fun little thing, you don't have to await if you're returning a promise. This will still be smart enough to know that the return type here is a promise, because the return type here is a thing being called that in the end boils down to a promise. So we don't have to make this and mark this async. It's kind of inferred through the returning of a promise. In the future, if we do something else async before here, it might be a good idea. But for now, this is fine. We'll do similar export function, get files. Same exact deal there. Let's make sure we're exporting this guy too. Export async function, get all parents, which takes a folder ID. Cool. I might rename this to get all parents for folder to make it clearer what it's actually doing when you read the code. Obviously, this is folder ID, so when you're hovering over it, it indicates it. But it'd be nice if we get that info in a more realistic way. So now instead of having all of these DB calls and DB specific things, I'm going to change that promise to get all parents for folder, change this one to get files, and then change this one to get folders. These are all missing, but I think once again, cursors being smart, I can tab complete to handle all the imports. That's like one of my favorite things. The auto importing was more broken in cursor. Now it's more functional than in anything else I use. We can delete this guy here because we don't need it anymore. Delete this, delete all the DB specific stuff. And it broke these into separate imports. That's silly. We'll move them. I was just complimenting the auto import and then it did something dumb. But there we go. Look at how much clearer this is. Another thing we could do, instead of putting all of these here, if we really wanted, Move that. Move that. Move this. Look at how clear this component is now. We just broke it down from a ton of code over to 26 lines by breaking out these reusable functions. It's even clearer what this component does than it was before. It's Google Drive clone. Params is the params from the URL. We parse the ID, making sure it's an integer. And if it's not a number, invalid folder ID, then we await promise.all to get all the folders, files, and parents for where we currently are, and return drive content, files, folders, parents. This is awesome. I genuinely really like this. I am happy it has gotten this easy to do stuff like this. One more small thing I want to do. We're going to commit this first, though. Save all those deletions. Then we have to -a for the missing file. Commit -m. Cleanup, data, access, pattern. I know I just said I want to do one thing. I actually want to do two. So we're just going to command click one of these so we get back to the definition. First and foremost, we need to know this is only ever on the server. So import server only. Dope. That's part one. Part two, and this is probably the single most opinionated thing I'm going to do maybe in this entire video. I'm still not sure it's my favorite pattern. I've went back and forth on it with my team, but I've grown to quite like it. We're going to take all of these exports and delete them. Wait, why would you do that? How am I going to get these? Hear me out. Export const queries equals. Actually, I don't even think we need the prefix to be formatted like that. I think I can just do async function. Oh no, that only works with classes. I've been writing too many classes lately. We can go through here now and move the file name to the left, colon. Make sure we put commas for the different things. The same here. Colon, don't forget the comma. Close at the end. And what we just did is move all of these to be defined under a single const queries. Personally, I like to separate queries from mutations because a query is something you can keep rerunning and not worry about. A mutation is something that you only want to run once because if it runs twice, it might mutate things. That's why it's called a mutation. By labeling this as queries, we now have a very clear indication when we're calling this code what it is without having to even see where it was imported from. If somebody was to change code from here down, for example, in code review, we might not see where these functions came from and we might not know what's going on at all. I've run into this quite a bit when I'm working with these new models. But if we change this to be queries, and then for each of these, I'm just pressing Command D to select like that, by the way, if you're curious, queries dot get folders, queries dot get files, queries dot get all parents for folder. Now it is very simple, very clear. I might rename that to query, but again, plurals, everyone has their opinions. I think this is really nice. It clearly indicates that this is coming from our data layer. You could do db, capital db.queries or something like that, but I think this is totally fine. Not saying this naming is perfect, not even saying this pattern is perfect, but you absolutely should be separating your data layer out from your React code and logic. I don't think it should necessarily live in a different code base or on a different service hosted by a different team. If you're doing that, it's fine, but you should not be writing SQL right inside of your components. It shows the power of the functionality here, but this is a way more maintainable and clear way to do this right. And if I'm going to call these tutorials production ready, I want to make sure I show you guys what actual production code looks like throughout. Once again, we're going to commit this. Get commit -m, cleanup with minimal data access layer. Going to push it quick. I'm going to call this your reward for making it so far in the tutorial, but really it's just because I've been going for so long. My cat's being needy. There we go. Hi, bud. As you can tell, I've been working a lot the last few days, and as a result, he's begging more than ever. Productivity tip, don't get a cat. They will bug you for attention all the time. But life tip, do get a cat. They will bug you for attention all the time. And look at how cute he is. Tell me he's not the best thing ever. He's so good. Here, there you go. Look at that boy. quality cat break. Think I can safely check this box off. Haven't done the home page yet. We'll probably not do that next. I do want to add auth next. So we're going to do auth. When we do auth, we might do a quick pass on the home page, and then we'll start finishing up. We're actually making a lot of progress, guys. Thank you for holding strong throughout. So homepage or auth? Homepage or auth? I think it's auth time. Gonna have to find a new place to put the upload button because that's where I like to put my little auth button. So let's do that. As I mentioned before, Clerk is a longtime sponsor, and they are also the auth solution of choice for basically every product that I've built. They just, once you've used it, you'll understand. There are so many little edge cases with auth that just aren't fun that they kind of just make go away. You can sign in with whatever, obviously. They're an auth service, so they have a lot of options. I use GitHub. It is what it is. Gonna hop in here and get this started. You can pick whichever auth options you want to support. I don't care to support most of these. It's cool they have so many and things that I haven't seen much of in other services like Linear, which is genuinely cool. But I like my Google Auth. Everyone has it. It's super standard and it keeps people from forgetting which thing they signed in with. And let's just use Google Auth. And again, to make things easier, that shows in the UI. So capitals. So we all have the same name. Drive, tutorial, Next.js, already picked for us. Scroll down, click the little PNPM if you're like me and used PNPM. Click the copy, back over to our terminal, paste, enter. And while that's installing, I'm going to go set up the environment variables. They say to put it in .env.local. I think every option other than standard .env is cursed and bad and should be avoided. So I will not be doing that. It would also be a good-ish idea to put the Clerk secret key in the env.js so that you know it's there. But since we're not importing it anywhere because that key is just used by their SDK, we don't have to call it from the env variable that is defined by our package. So it's not necessary. I'm going to skip it to prove that. Okay, looks like the package is installed and we have our environment variables. Let's add the middleware. If you're not familiar with middleware in Next, it's a pretty cool pattern. The way it works is before a request actually gets to the Next.js server or the CDN that the static files might be hosted on, a very small JavaScript function running on the edge, which is a computer that's probably pretty close to your user, that's already running, will quickly spin up your JavaScript file, the middleware, TS, it will be JS at that point. And when that happens, it's going to do whatever you do in there and then send the user to the right place. Think of it as a really, really fast switch statement that is copy pasted all over the world so people can go to the right place when they're going to your site. So if you want to keep someone from doing something like going to a certain route when they shouldn't because they're not authed, middleware is an okay place to do that. The catch is that it runs on every single request and you only have one middleware TS. There is a proposal to fix that, but generally I would recommend, because we don't know how that proposal is going to go or if it's going to end up happening, that for now, you just filter out the routes that it shouldn't run on. So here we're filtering out a ton of stuff, but we're making sure it always runs for API routes because we would want to have auth information on those. To be clear, this isn't blocking any of the routes here. It just means that when you go to the route, it's going to verify your cookie so that we know that you are or aren't who your cookie says you are, so that all of the other things that you do, like API calls, server components, and anything in between, can call their auth function and know if you're authed or not. You can put custom code in the Clerk middleware in order to choose which routes are and aren't accessible publicly. I don't care though, because we're just going to assume everything is public and to do our checks on the server side when we have the auth object so that we know if you should or shouldn't be there. Instead of doing it in the middleware, we'll do it in the actual components or in the data fetching logic instead. Next, we need to add the Clerk provider. If you're not familiar with providers, they're a React method to expose state to everything below. It's relatively common to just dump a bunch of these at the top of your app file because it lets everything access things. It's the only generic way to share data globally in React. There's a lot of less generic ways and packages and things that handle it too. But generally speaking, providers are the way to do it. And when you're working in a big code base and that was written in React, I'd be very surprised if you didn't have a giant pile of these at the top of the code base. And now we're going to grab this section here for the Clerk provider. We don't want the signed in, signed out buttons all in our layout, but I can just copy paste this part. I'm not going to bother because I can just control space. It doesn't know about it. Once again, Command Shift P, reload window, and now it should be a little smarter. No? Don't know why TypeScript's taking its time catching up there. Regardless, I will copy and paste this and just delete the lines we don't want. Cool. See, it does know that that exists. I don't know why it wasn't smart enough to autocomplete that. Now it is. Silly. And if you don't know the hotkey, it's Control on Mac, Control space to get the autocomplete to pop up. Hotkey I use far too often. So we have all of this, and now, theoretically, anywhere in the app, we should be able to check our auth state. The easiest way to do it is to build a top nav. We'll do the signed out, signed in. I'm just going to copy their code directly. One of the cool things Clerk does is gives you a bunch of components so you don't have to build all of that stuff yourself. I also can't help but notice the metadata, something we need to touch. We'll come back in a second for that. I want that to be separate. I'll hop into here, where we should be authenticated. And in here, we will see drive contents. And in drive contents, there should be our top nav. So right now, the upload button is right there. We're going to replace this. Just going to make it a div so it all gets put in the same spot. Fix that close. It's going to make us import all these things. And of course, it did my favorite cursorism. It imported them all separately instead of sharing the import. But thankfully, Cursor's smart enough to fix that once I start fixing one. I'll leave the upload import because we're going to use that later. But here we are. We got div, close div, and we have the components provided. The signed in and signed out components are wrappers that will only render the contents if you are or aren't signed in. We could even wrap the whole page with the signed out and then not render it at all if you're not signed in. We should probably do that on the server side though. We'll get there in just a bit. But I want to make sure when we go here now that we have our auth button. I forgot to run the dev server. So as you see, we still have access to this because we haven't done anything to change our access, but we also have our new little sign-in button. If I click that, I can click continue with Google. Sweet, dearest, beloved editor, you've worked hard working on this. Please blur my email for this next step. That said, let's sign in and click on the Gmail account I want to use. Continue. We're in. And we even have the fancy little menu here. But the benefit here, which is super handy, is with almost no effort, we get all the fancy manage account buttons, sign out. This is only there if you're not paying. There are ways to hide it, but you should pay them if you want to hide the branding. It's super simple though. How easy was that? What did that take? I've been recording for 8 minutes. So less than 8 minutes. And there's a lot of talking and stammering around. But we have auth fully working. So you know what we do when we have something that works as we expect it to. We commit. This is all package locks. I probably should have just -a'd this, but I like doing my little code reviews. Cool. Commit -m. Working auth. What do you mean you failed to sign the data? Yeah? Not gonna lie, Git kind of sucks. I'm gonna reboot my laptop to see if that fixes this, and I will pause the recording until then. Okay, we are rebooted. Let's see if we have better luck. Commit -m. Auth working. The fuck? Okay. Well, normally this probably wouldn't belong in a tutorial, but we all know what we're here for. We want practical, real advice. And I'm going to give you the realist. I promise this is not staged. This is actually what I would have done. I will hop over to T3 Chat, which is the AI chat app that I built because the rest are too slow. I am suddenly getting the following error when I try to commit on my Mac. What might be the cause? Okay, I'm sure at least one of these options is going to fix it. I'm going to pause again and fix my environment because I'm angry. This probably happened because I did some brew install, which triggered an update that it shouldn't have. And this is why we all hate being software devs. I'm sorry. I have to take a moment to mourn. I've been using this key for, I think, 4 years. I am sad. Salute to a real one. Never kept a GPG key that long before having it get leaked or lost it or failed before. Kind of crazy it happened in the middle of me recording a tutorial because we're a little past midnight. Hopefully this makes for a fun gag because give me a bit. Okay, I realized I should probably show you guys how I solve this problem. Okay, my key has expired. How do I generate a new one and update it on GitHub? Cool. Thank you, T3 Chat, for making my life significantly easier. Yeah, this makes that a lot easier. I will let you guys see this, but I don't want you to see the key that I generate. So BRB. So I had to save it in my keychain, but now I have everything working again. Yay. And I also learned a little bit too. This is the benefit of a tool like T3 Chat. Again, not to just self-plug, but I had some interesting questions. It told me that the default was going to be RSA and RSA. I know a decent bit about encryption, so I was surprised when the default wasn't RSA. It was actually ECC sign-in encrypt. So I asked what the difference was and got a really good breakdown. It's the new elliptic curve cryptography. Apparently it uses less CPU and memory, faster to compute, and they're way smaller. Pretty cool. So I used that because it's the new default, and just thought it was interesting. And I checked because GitHub's what I care about. I made sure it still supports ECC, and it does. Nice. These are the benefits of using tools like T3 Chat. You can have a better deep dive, if that makes sense. I can ask questions and get answers. I did want to intentionally cause an error though, so we're going to do that quick. Git push. Why would that cause an error? Let's see if you can guess before I spoil the answer. We're going to hop over here. I'll give you a hint if you haven't guessed yet. It isn't going to break the build. Have you figured it out? If you haven't figured it out yet, we'll wait till the build is done and we'll see it there. Oh, it did fail to build. Let's see if we get some good info here as to why. Look at that. It does give us a real error. The thing I forgot, and I'm actually thankful Clerk's smart enough to call it out, is we forgot to include the key. I knew that, but I wanted to see if you guys would guess. As I mentioned before, ideally you put stuff like that in the env.js. I intentionally didn't because I wanted to hit that error, but it looks like Clerk is smart enough to throw a build error instead of us getting to the runtime and having more obscure errors. So we're going to go fix that. Hop back here. Gonna hide my sidebar to give us a little more room. The dashboard won't be as bad on your screen. It's just bad on mine because I'm on 720p. Don't ask questions. Hop over here. Click the little wrong button. I'm covering the add a variable button here, but we're gonna do the import. So I can paste like that again. All scopes is fine because it's dev keys. In the future, you're gonna want different keys for dev and prod because as you saw, we had a little development bubble. But once you're in production, you're going to need to set up your own app in Google or whatever other auth provider you're using. Because when you're in dev mode, Clerk forwards everything to Clerk servers and uses their own keys with those services for the OAuth and third parties. You need to use your own for your production apps. There's a lot of reasons why I don't feel like making this video about that, but no, when you're shipping an actual app to production and you have OAuth in it, the OAuth keys that are used on Google's or Apple's or Facebook's side to authenticate your users, those need to come from your app that you own. Clerk makes it really easy in dev, but when you're ready for production, you need to go set that all up. They have guides on how to do all of that. We're not going to in this tutorial because we're not here to learn about auth. We're here to learn about how to build a full stack app. And there's already great resources for all of that. But now that that's been fixed, we need to go redeploy. You can just go to the failed build, click retry with latest. And now it's going to try again, this time with the updated environment variables. Cool, the deploy is done. Since this is the production deployment, I can just go straight to that link. You'll have a different one probably. Have to subscribe. We'll just go to /f/1 for now. Sign in. Same deal. Look away. Don't try and steal my email address. We'll be right back. And look, we're in on a real URL with real auth. I think that's pretty cool. It took me longer to fix my GPG key than it took us to set up full stack auth on a real web service. Complain all you want about auth as a service. I think this is awesome. The shortest checkbox on the list has now been checked. Hop over to the README. Check that box. We could immediately add file upload. Honestly, I'm on a bit of a getting everything working kick. I say we do that. I'm going to commit that change quick. README update auth working. Cool. Won't push because we don't want to trigger a build for that, but we do have it. So now let's add file uploading. If only there was a YouTuber that had built a service that makes it significantly easier to add file upload to your apps. Wouldn't that be cool? I know. Crazy, absurd thought. You can name it Drive Tutorial. Now we have Drive Tutorial here. We hop over to API keys, click once on the copy button, go back over, go up to the .env, paste. And so we don't forget like we forgot earlier, I'm also going to go over to Netlify and add it in here now. There are services to make it slightly easier to sync all these things. I don't trust any of them, so I tend to do it all by hand. Site config, environment variables. Again, I'm covering the button. Import, paste. Done. As you can imagine, doing file uploads safely is quite hard. So once again, I'm thankful we made it so much easier. We're going to go to docs.uploadthing.com. We really should give you a bit more info on how to get there to be fixed. Also, my team promised me to get rid of that. They better do that by the time you're watching the tutorial. Click the copy after clicking PNPM. Go right back here, paste. We already grabbed our token. We have to now set up a file router. I'll explain what this all is in a second, but for now, we're just going to click copy, go to the file it says, which is app/API/uploadthing/core, source app, new file, API/uploadthing/core.ts, .ts because there's no JSX in here. I'm going to kill my fake auth function because why would we want a fake auth function? I'm going to start getting rid of, I'll leave the comments for now. Just want to see this all working. So we'll import auth. It doesn't need a request because the user is the one making this request, so it's smart enough to know how to handle that. So we have request here. We don't really need it anymore. I could just, that has been deleted. If no user, we throw a new UploadThing error unauthorized. It is funny that we're only supposed to throw actual errors here. This is ESLint. Only throw error. Maybe it's, there we go. It's not an add-on ESLint. Cool. Sorry you have to do that. To be fixed soon. One problem here is we don't actually care about it being user because user is an auth object. We need to know that user ID exists. So if there's no user ID, we're going to throw because you shouldn't be able to upload if you're not authorized. And then user.userid assures this is the actual user and their ID. So why are we returning that? Well, we should probably go over this whole file so I can explain what it actually does. This is the file router. It's a pattern for keeping track of what endpoints exist in your app that a user can upload to. So if you have multiple places in your app that users can upload multiple different things, let's say you're building a Twitter clone, you want users to be able to upload a profile picture, which has a limit of 1 file. You can't upload 3 pro pics, you need to upload 1. Maybe you set a max file size of 4 MB for that. Maybe you have another place in your app where a user can upload up to 10 things at once. Maybe they can be images, maybe they can be videos, maybe they can be both. The reason we built UploadThing this way is so that you have one config, in this case your file router, that describes all the different ways your users can upload to your service. Image uploader is the default uploader that we have here. We'll use it for a quick test, but we're going to come in and edit it a bunch. The F helper here is to create a file route. Image uploader is the file route here that you can upload images to. You know it takes images because it has the key image and it has these additional properties. If we wanted to make it so it did video instead, I can change that to video, or we can use any valid MIME type and restrict it that way instead. Pretty cool. So now we can upload any video, but a video of 4 MB isn't particularly good. So we're going to change that back to image. You can even specify different types of image if you want to be stricter. We'll just leave this as is for now. Now let's explain the other parts of a file route. The important two that you need to know about are the middleware and onUploadComplete. Middleware is a function that runs before the user starts the upload. When the user makes that request, this is the code that runs. And when this code runs, it's the user making the request. So when you access the request object like this is the actual request from that user. And the auth function here is from Clerk. And Clerk's smart enough to look at who's making the request and do the right thing. There is a catch. You cannot call auth and expect it to work on onUploadComplete. The reason for that is onUploadComplete isn't called by the user, it's called by us on the UploadThing side. When I say us, I mean the company I run paying that made UploadThing, not us, the people doing the tutorial. The reason for that is if a user was to upload a file after getting the URL to do the upload via middleware, they could just block your service and then you wouldn't know when they're done if you had the user notify you when the upload is done. Because the user doesn't upload the file to your service, they upload it straight to UploadThing. So you don't have to eat all the bandwidth, the ingress, the egress, the weird costs and times to run things associated with a user uploading a file directly through your service. It also means we can handle a lot of annoying edge cases. Things like you're trying to restore a file upload halfway through because your internet went out. You can't just do that on your own server, and you certainly can't do that with a pre-signed post URL on S3. Believe me, we tried. So to get all these things working right, we have our own servers that handle the file uploads, so you don't have to deal with any of that crap. You just copy paste this code, and it all works safely, correctly, first try. So if you have data you want in onUploadComplete, which runs on your server when the upload is done, you have to pass that data, and you pass it by returning it in middleware. So the order of events is user clicks button. When they click the button, a request is made to your server to make sure they're allowed to upload. The way you keep them from uploading is by throwing if they shouldn't be able to. So if you had a limit to how much storage they could use, you could check if they've used it here and throw an error if they've used too much, so then they can't upload more. Whatever you return is useful later on. Once this function is done, it sends a URL to the user. They don't see it or anything. It just runs in the client-side code. That is where the file gets sent to. The user then sends the file to that URL, and then when it is done, we notify you the upload was completed. We'll call onUploadComplete when it is done, and whatever you return here gets sent back to the user on their end, all through our own connections, which makes it super, super, super simple. So if you want to do something like persist this data in the database when the upload has been completed, you would put that in onUploadComplete, and now it will be handled. Now, let's do this part. Back over to server, queries, and put a new thing in here. Export const mutations equals. We're going to do create file for now. We'll handle creating folders later on. So create files, assuming we have auth. We're not going to have auth because, again, auth's a vague concept that isn't necessarily one we get to operate with here. I am also seeing that it's typing file incorrectly. I want to fix this because I don't like this always using that. So I'm going to fix that too. Notice going down yet another rabbit hole. We'll hop in here. And below here, I'm just going to export the type because I'm tired of dealing with this. Type db file type of files table infer select. And that will be just that. Cool. And we'll do the same below here. Export type db folder type. Same deal. It's really nice that Drizzle gives us these little infer select helpers, but I don't want to have to call that all the time. So now we can just call db underscore folder type and db underscore file type. db file type. The only catch here is that that's expecting an ID, which we can fix. Oh, it also doesn't have the user's ID. We'll do that in a bit too. We're going to do partial of db file type. We don't want a partial here. We want an omit. Omit lets us pick specific keys that won't be included. So now if we hover here, we'll see it's an omit with ID omitted, which means that we should just be able to call file down here. And if this worked properly, I dislike that omitting doesn't directly just omit that. This type is different enough from the DB type that I don't want it here. So we're gonna not do this anymore. Instead, I'm just gonna make a custom type for this. So I'm realizing things like created at, which we're gonna add in the DB later, we don't want those here. I'm also a little mad at myself for forgetting to put created at in here. It's one of my, I think it's really important to have a created at and an updated at field on basically everything in your database. And I didn't put one here because I'm dumb. Yeah, problem for later. I'm also going to pass the user ID here because we want it. These arguments are getting weird, so I'm gonna wrap. I'm gonna do input, colon, and now input has file on it, but we also want this to have user ID, which is a string. We're not gonna use it just yet, but at least we have access to it. And now since the file's already uploaded, let's put it in our database. Return await db.insert. That was too easy. I almost dislike when this works this easily, but it does have matching types. I did just copy paste them. So return await db.insert file schema.values input.files. And now if we go back over here, look at how smart cursor is. We can now safely await mutations.createFile, pass it all of these values. It's erroring because it's missing one. If we hover over, we will see property user ID is missing in type. I probably should have mentioned why my type errors look so nice. You might be seeing this and confused. This is one of my favorite packages. You've killed it with this. I have a whole video about per DTS error. It just takes those terribly formatted errors that you get in VS Code and makes them look way less awful. It's a bunch of hacks to make it work, but they work. And the result is you get a better error. I don't know how I would deal with these terrible errors if it wasn't for that plugin. User ID is metadata.user ID, which again, we're getting from above here. And it's all inferred type. So if I change this from user ID to user, we'll immediately get a type error because it's expecting it to be in a different shape. Cool. Await mutations.createFile. Looks like we're mostly done here. Uploaded by metadata.user ID. Cool. This is just what gets returned to the client. You don't need to do anything here, but it is nice because by doing a return here, now the client side's not going to run its completion function until everything we just did is completed, which means we can refresh or revalidate the page content at that point, and we're good. But we haven't done any of that yet, so I guess now's a better time than ever. Go back to the tutorial, scroll down a little bit. We have to expose the route because right now this is a random file named core. It doesn't really need to exist. It just makes it easier to import other places. But we do need to actually expose this. So we create route.ts. Once again, paste these exact contents. We don't need a config, so I can delete that part. Scroll down, and now we have our utils. This is where we actually export things the client is going to use. I'll use the defaults for now, but we are going to change them. Since these are components, I am going to put them in the components folder. It doesn't really matter. Also, they don't have to be .tsx because we're not calling the JSX. There's no JSX syntax here. These are generics. Don't get it confused. But we now have the upload button and drop zone. We're not going to use the drop zone, although it would be nice to drag and drop things on the page and have it work anywhere. Check out my last tutorial if you want some good examples on how to do that part. We're skipping it for here, though. Hop back over to drive contents. And now we need to put this somewhere. So we have this table. Well, I guess it's a grid. Oh, that's interesting. The folder and file rows aren't necessarily following the grid's shape because this grid wrapper is one layer higher. Yeah, today I learned. So we will go one layer lower here. Look at that. It's picking the wrong component because I want the upload button. Endpoint image uploader. You might have noticed there was another upload button coming from the package that we have. Why would we want this one and not that one? Why would we just export this? That was one of my favorite features of UploadThing. We're actually using the backend's types for this button. Why do we care? It's just a button. Well, by doing this, we make sure we only can call endpoints that exist. If I change this from image uploader to images, we get a type error because that's not an endpoint that exists. It's not a route that exists. And we can control space to autocomplete it. We don't even need AI. There's no AI involved in this all working. It just works. Now, if we go back to our app, sometimes SingleStore will disconnect. It's a little annoying. Just kill and restart your dev server. You'll be good to go. Here we are. We have our choose file, no file chosen. Looks like I forgot to include the styles because we blasted through the tutorial. So I'll do that really quick. So yeah, make sure you're using Tailwind v3. I'm going to grab the with UT wrapper here. Go over to our Tailwind config, import this, and then wrap it with UT. I don't like that it's using require syntax for this. It really shouldn't be, so I'm going to fix that quick too. Import, animate, and then swap that. Cool. And if we go back over, look at that, an actual upload button. Click, and you'll notice it's graying out a lot of things because right now it's only allowing images. Thankfully, I have a bunch of images because I post a lot of images. So I will pick the thumbnail for my last video, and nothing happened. Yeah? Well, if I refresh, still nothing happened. Huh. Where could the file be? Well, if I hop over here, look at that, bad antivirus. It made it, and when I click it, it works. So what went wrong? Well, we forgot something. We forgot to give it a parent. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually failed to insert in the DB because we didn't give it a parent. Looks like it didn't, but there's an easy fix here. Not for that file. That file is effectively gone forever. But for future files, we can fix this relatively easily. We're going to sneak back over to server, go into queries, and make sure when this happens that this has a parent because right here, kind of lying because it won't have a parent at that point. And now we're getting the type error that I would expect. We'll give it parent 1. But this still isn't going to update on the client side because it has no reason to. So we will fix that super quick as well. I like to drive content. And I think this is the first time where use client being here is actually going to benefit us. I'm going to kill this handle upload. We're going to add a router call here. Const navigate equals use router. This use router comes from next router. Actually, I think we want it from next navigation. It's very annoying that there are two use routers in next right now, and next/router is for pages, and next/navigation is for app router. They need to work on these things. It is what it is. But for now, we have our new navigate function, and it is very useful here because we want to add on upload complete, on client upload complete specifically. And in here, we can now call navigate. Well, navigate.refresh. So what does this do? Well, as you might have seen earlier, all of this data comes from the page component for this route, which means the client doesn't have a way to update this data because it's not calling an API to get it. It just kind of exists when the page is rendered. So how do I get new data? Well, since all of this is serialized content that gets streamed down anyways, when you call router.refresh, or in this case, navigate.refresh, same deal, you can call a variable whatever. Calling this tells Next, hey, We need updated data from the server for this route, and it will pull down the new route and just hot swap whatever's on the page. Super nice way to not have to deal with APIs back and forth. You just call this and it will revalidate page contents and give you the right state. We can see that happening. Gonna give this a refresh just in case. Now we'll go back here, we'll upload bad antivirus again. And look, as soon as it was done, it appeared. No custom code to manually pull down the new data, no weird API endpoints we have to hit that update the state, no optimistic bullshit. We just did it and it worked. We even have the size being passed through here correctly. And if all went well, I should be able to click and it goes to the file. We did it. We're done. It all works. Okay. We got a lot more small things to do, but hopefully you're feeling that juice of, oh shit, it works, because it does. There's something special about all the parts coming together like this. We got a bunch of little things to fix though. So before we commit this, let's make the list of what we have to fix. Back over to the README. Still got to do the new homepage. We're now on 129. This has been a while to film, okay? We've got a lot of T3 chat bugs I had to fix. So we added file uploading. Now we need to upload files to the right folder. Delete files button. Allow files that aren't images to be uploaded. Cool. I'm also catching, there's going to be a lot of fun challenges for you guys to work on your own after, which is something I really like to provide. You shouldn't just stop playing with these code bases as soon as the video is over. You should take the opportunity to explore and experiment. I would argue that you didn't really succeed with this tutorial if as soon as it's over, you close the code base and never open it again. You should keep playing for at least an hour or two, add one additional feature to make sure that the lessons that you learn here are really ingrained so you can apply them other places in the future. So now we have a good solid list here of things we need to continue with. I'm gonna cross that one off the list because I'm proud that we got it done. Git status, quite a few new files. I'm gonna git add package JSON and the PNPM lock by hand so that we can still git add -p and get a nice little code review. We imported the use router, we imported the upload button. That all looks good. Upload button, endpoint image uploader, looks good to me. DB file type, mutations, looks good. We exported those, we're not using them, but it's good to have them. Cool. Commit, file upload works. I need to stop forgetting to escape things. I committed wrong. You guys have to learn another trick. Git commit -- amend. Puts you into Vim so you can fix it. You press I to insert, escape when you're done, :WQ. And look, I'm a real Vim user. Who would have known? Yes, I pressed arrow keys, ignore me. Anyways, it wasn't real arrow keys. I have bindings on my home row. But now we have that pushed. There's one other thing. I was almost going to add it to the list here, but I realized if I do that, it'd be silly. Oh, wait, no, fuck. I forgot a file. I forgot a few files. So adding those, we're going to amend once more. If you amend when you have things on your Git stage, so if you do git status, you see these green, git commit -- amend, we'll add those to your existing commit. And we can push it. Well, we can't because I already pushed and now there's a difference. But you can force it. So the thing I wanted to fix that's too small to put it in the to-do list is the name of things. Still says create T3 app. I'm just going to change this to Drive tutorial. We need a description. We'll say it's like Google Drive, but worse. Don't know about you guys, but mine is not quite as good as Google Drive. I'm also seeing we still have an error in the core file here. What's it upset about? Oh, that we're passing parent 0? Oh, that's because it doesn't exist. I suppose we should include that. Swap that, save, close. Now there's no type errors and we're actually passing the data right. We do need to get the right data there on the client though. So git status, git add, committing this, fix type errors. Let's make sure the user's uploading somewhere that they are allowed to upload. Oh, there's like a lot of little pieces we have to fix for that actually now that I think about it. We got a lot left on this. Okay, I'll deal with the homepage in a bit. First, though, I'm going to move this to the bottom. We got too many other things to do. We have to add ownership to files and folders because right now you can see anything. And that's cool for a demo app, but ideally you'd only be able to see files and folders for yourself. So we shall fix that. The schema needs to be updated because right now it only has ID, name, size, URL, and parent. I want to add the created app and updated app because it annoys me that they don't exist. Let's see if this gets this right. Do I need to put this in? It might not be needed. I'll leave the not null. Default now. Cool. So now we have a created app that will default to now. Going to do the same thing for folders because even if you think you don't need a created app field, you will eventually, and you'll regret not having one. Now, since this is core identifier info, I'm going to put it up here. User ID. I'm going to change it to owner ID because it's a little more explicit. It's text. It is not null. And we'll do the same down here. But one more thing, remember, we're going to want to be able to look things up by the owner ID, so we'll add an index for it. Look at how smart that is. Index owner ID index on t.ownerID. And we can do the same over here. The reason we do this is because we're going to be looking up by owner ID because we want to get all the files or folders that you own. So if we can't look up by owner ID, we're kind of screwed. Now, thankfully, this is handled. We are going to need to migrate, and our migrate is going to break things because those fields don't have defaults. I could be real lazy and go add a default in for those. But honestly, the best bet is probably just to kill the data in the database and we can update our seed function accordingly. npm run db push. Okay, reading from tutorial source server db schema.ts. What is it importing from somewhere it shouldn't? Is it the import server only? There's no way that's breaking, right? That's kind of silly. I guess you can't put import server only in your schema? That's dumb. That's really dumb. I'm going to yell at people about that later. Anyways, here we see that this is going to cause data loss because, again, we're going to make changes. The big changes are we're adding a not null field, owner ID, to both of these. And since that has items in it, they won't be able to exist anymore because I'd put the DB in a bad state. If the database thinks owner ID has to exist, but it has fields where it doesn't, since this doesn't have a default value, it's just going to kill those items. That's fine. We're going to reset the DB effectively when we do this. It would be nice to change these to be big int 20 so it matches. I'm going to abort and do that quick. Let me go check the Drizzle docs quick. Okay, so here it says that they omitted the ability to config m in big int, which is what we wanted to do to set that to 20. So it's probably just going to give that error every time. That's fine. It's not really an error. It's more a warning, and it's not going to cause data loss for those parts because it's changing fields to be the same as they were. But it is going to kill the stuff that doesn't have an owner ID, which nothing does. So we are doing this knowing it's going to kill things. Is drive dash tutorial a bad prefix? Oh man. Oh man, oh man. I'm running into so many stupid things. Gonna switch that. Gonna go change it in the Drizzle config. I am gonna comment this out because again, we want it to nuke everything. npm run db push. I'm doing create because I want it to kill everything else in the other tables. Bada bing, bada boom. Changes applied. So theoretically, this should all be good. Remember that sandbox we made earlier? Now's a good time to head back over to it. Did I not commit it? Of course I didn't commit it. Why would I ever commit something that useful? So we'll do sandbox/page.tsx. We're gonna export default function sandbox. Look at that, smart enough to know we're gonna need DB. We need our form, button, type a submit, create file, and now action, async function, use server. I don't want to just insert a bunch of test data. I also want to make sure we have the right values here. But since this is an actual thing that we'll be clicking as the user, we can add const user equals await auth. And now that we have user awaited here, we get the user ID. We can throw an error if it doesn't exist. And if it does, we can pass it in as the owner ID, give things URLs and whatever else. We don't want to insert files table though. We want folders table. And we want different values for that for sure. I don't know why that got doubled up. Do we still have our mock data? It'd be really nice if we still had our mock data. We do. Look at that. Well, if we hop back over to our sandbox, values can take an individual value or an array. So we're going to make the array. Const insertable folders equals mock folders dot map, and we'll just dump the folder contents. We don't want the whole folder contents actually, so we don't want ID and a few other things. So we're gonna not do that. We'll say name, folder.name, parent, folder.parent, sure. We won't actually know what the parent ID is because we don't have any of those until this has been inserted. It's probably a good idea to insert that root folder first. Folder equals await db.insert. So what we get back from here with root folder isn't actually useful. This is a SingleStore raw query result. But we can call this $returning ID method at the end, which will make sure that we at least get the ID back when this is done. This has a .id that we can use for the rest. So now here we can do root folder.id as the parent, ID number array. Oh yes. If you're not familiar with the exclamation point, it basically tells TypeScript, screw you, I know this exists. Stop pretending it doesn't, because we don't technically know that index 0 on this array exists. It is possible it inserted nothing. It is possible it ran an error. So we don't know this exists, but this is a seed function. We know it exists. It's fine. This is like the one place where it actually makes a lot of sense to use something like that. So now we can insert all these folders, and after we'll make our insertable files using mock files. And we're going to again filter, get the owner ID, parent. It's going to have file.parent. We don't actually want that. You know what? How about we don't insert mock files, because we did add the ability to upload them. So we'll just make the folders for now. Localhost 3000/sandbox. It says create file still. Whatever. Probably should have logged things so that we knew that worked. But at the very least, it supposedly worked. I want to know what folders we have. There's a lot of ways we could do this. Honestly, easiest thing, it's probably just to make this async. So default async function sandbox const folders equals await db select from folders table where, and here's where we get to take advantage of the stuff we just made. Where equal folders table dot owner ID user dot user ID. We have to import equal. And we have to get the user. Now I'll throw if they don't exist. But what we did here is we are selecting all the folders where the folder table owner ID is equal to the user ID. So now we have the folders. We could render them. I just want to know what they are though. Now that we've done that, look at this. We have all of our folders: document, root, work, and presentations, and images. We only care about root. I'm going to copy that. And you might have also noticed the IDs are a little different. That's because we have SingleStore managing it all for us with their big ints to guarantee everyone's number is unique. And look at that. We now have this all working with navigation handled properly as we click things. Pretty dope. We do need to handle the file upload though, so it goes to the right place, because right now it's hard-coded to 1, which is not ideal at all. Thankfully, we added a feature for this somewhat recently in UploadThing that'll make it quite a bit easier. If we hop back over to API core, it's time to add an input. .input. And this, as you can probably guess, because Julius is on our team and Julius is one of the lead maintainers of TRPC, lets us do a Zod input validator. So now we have .input here, and it's an object that takes a folder ID. And in here, we'll have input. And since this validates, we don't have to double check, like we are good. But we do need to make sure the user can do this. So we're going to go back over to queries. I'll deal with the insert in a minute, okay? And here, we want our new get folder by ID. Well, we don't really want to get the folder by ID. We should get, you know what? This is fine. We're not going to, I was going to pass the user object here. We don't have to. We don't need to do the user part here. We can just get this and make sure it matches on the other side. So we'll hop back over to core. Const folder equals await queries dot get folder. Wait, did I put that in the wrong place? Ah, that needs to be a number. How silly of me. Folder comes from this query. Get folder by ID, we return 0. If it doesn't exist, we throw a new UploadThing error, which means we got to copy paste this again. And we'll do one last auth check directly below. So you need to make sure the user does actually have permission to do this. And once again, cursor spaced. If folder.ownerID is not the same as the current user's ID, we throw unauthorized because they're not authorized to do this thing. Ta-da! And now you can only upload to a folder that you own. But how do we actually pass that folder ID? It doesn't just magically get it. Well, now you'll see here we have a type error because this is missing input. It needs input to know what to do. We're not currently passing it the folder ID for where we are. We could get it via the router, but since we're getting all of this data from there, we should probably do this the same way. So current folder ID is a number. And if we go back up here, we're getting another type error. Always chase down the type error so you can figure out where things are missing. It also is one of the big benefits of TypeScript is if we make a change when we're building in this way where the source of truth lives in just one place, when we make a change, all the errors hydrate up and you can just follow the errors to make something that works. So now you have current folder ID. We just passed it there. And now input equals folder ID props the current folder ID. And if we did all this proper, I click here, we'll upload that. What's going on? Oh, we forgot to pass it when we actually do that last step because I'm dumb. Knew it'd forget something. Remember we have the hard-coded parent here? Well, we should actually use the folder ID. We'll pass it here. Folder ID, or I'll name it parent ID because that's what it is at this point. This is where it should go. And now we have in metadata here, metadata.parent ID. I'm going to go back and refresh. Do this. Let's pick a different image. Is getting here fine? They are making it over to UploadThing. So what appears to be the hold up? We're awaiting mutations.create file. We're passing this all the right stuff. It does appear to be mad here. What is this mad about? Is it, oh, we're not using the owner ID. So it was actually erroring. Okay. Got to follow the type errors. I didn't follow my own advice and I got screwed by it. That's really cool that it all just works. And if we go to a different thing, like let's say we go to images where I actually should be putting images, hop in here, choose, pick T3 chat tier list, and look at that. We have it in there and it persists. We can navigate around. And if we're not signed in or we're a different user that shouldn't be here, we can't just maliciously upload. So as silly as this all seems, this is actually a really secure implementation, minus the fact that you can see any folder that you have the ID for. You can only upload to one that you're authenticated for, that you're the owner of. That's pretty cool. So as you guys know by now, this is a fantastic time to commit. We're going to update the README. Should probably actually go change the README to reflect the changes that we made. README. We added ownership. We made upload work. We've not done the other parts yet, but this is real progress. Gonna hit Q so we can restart that, commit the right data there, fix the drive tutorial prefix. We added Zod as well as mutations and queries over to the UploadThing core file. Here we see the input validation as well as actually making sure the user has permission to upload to this folder. We pass the parent ID so that it's uploading in the right place. We pass the current folder ID to drive contents so that we know where the upload should go. We pass that as an input in the upload component so that the server knows where to put it. Return drive contents with the new current folder ID included so that the component has access to it. We added the get folder by ID function. We changed this to be owner ID. We already get parent from input.file. It was hard-coded before. We're using timestamps. We fixed the names. We fixed the owners. And yeah, I'm going to add the sandbox. It's too convenient to have. You shouldn't do this. Delete it when you go public. It's very nice having a sandbox to play around in. At the very least, like throw a disable in production mode thing on it. It's annoying, but for now we're good. Commit, upload to the correct file. And now that guy is pushed. We should let you upload other things. It's going to bother me that we can't, and I want to show how easy it is to do. Right now, type is image. There's better type. Blob. Blob says you can do whatever. We probably don't want to cap out at 4 megs. We'll cap out at 1 gigabyte. And we don't need to have a max file count of 1. We'll let you upload a lot. And with just those changes, we can refresh and you'll see files up to 1 gigabyte, max 999. All this data comes straight from the server. How cool is that? So here I can go pick a few things. Let's pick the Vivaldi arc theme that I'm using. We'll use that same image again. We'll take this sandbox I generated in Bolt. Uploading, and look at that. They all appeared in the right place, and you can click them and they'll download straight in your browser. If I go to my downloads folder, we'll see Vival Arc main got re-downloaded. It all works. I think that's really cool. It's also hilariously easy to change what something allows. Probably shouldn't be image uploader either. I'll just name it drive uploader. And now we're going to get our little error, see that that turned red because it's pointing at the wrong place. Change that, we're good to go. And it's all type safe from front to back. So if we change folder ID to folder, we get a type error. We change it on the other side, we get a type error. It guarantees we're not going to get an error because one side expected something and the other side sent something else. Let's make sure that we update the README as well with the things we just did. We allow all sorts of things now. We'll commit this as allow all files. Let's clean this up and get a more clear what we have left. So we have to add analytics. After we add analytics, I want to do the actual missing parts like add, delete, real home page plus onboarding. And note that when the user signs in the first time, they don't have a root folder, so we need to make sure we have some way of handling that during their onboarding. For now, let's add analytics, because very similar to what we just experienced setting up file uploads, the sponsor Posthog makes it quite easy to do. So we'll hop over here, hit their goofy accept. I'm already signed in, so we'll go to my dashboard. Make sure this is extraordinarily censored face. We're gonna make our drive-tutorial. And again, if you can, use the same name. Cool, we have our new project, Drive Tutorial. You'll see here, I have projects for a lot of things because I use Posthog on everything I care about. This is one of those products that if I didn't put it in some things, I don't give a crap about the thing. You should have a way to keep track of what people are actually doing with your product. When you set it up, they actually have a little next button there, and they show you all the things you need to set it up with next. We'll copy the PNPM command. I hate when they add a copy button when it copies more than what you actually want to. PNPM, add Posthog, scroll down, copy. You'll notice all the variables are public. That's because your users need access to them, because these variables are how those things get handled. Because the user is posting data, we need to attach a key to the data that they're posting. This is the key that gets attached. Then we need to initialize it. I actually have a little example here on how to do it in App Router, Posthog provider, client, type of all this junk. We're going to go make our new providers. Remember the thing I said earlier about how you have to have providers for like everything? This is what I meant. We'll hop back over here. We'll hop into the root. I've still yet to figure out how I like to structure things in projects like this. I might come up with a better answer in the future. For now, I'm going to do my best. We're going to make a folder. I'm going to wrap it with parens, name it home. I guess that this doesn't necessarily fix. We want this layout for everything, but I will move page into that. I'm going to move drive contents into this because that's the only place it's being referenced. And I'm going to do the same with file row. Makes this a little bit clearer. I'll make one more folder. Parens are a route group. It's a way of organizing things in App Router. They don't actually apply to routes. So when you put something in parentheses, it's basically telling Next, hey, don't include this in the route. Because if I did like hello/world/whatever/page.tsx, this will now resolve to /hello/world. The whatever gets ignored and page tsx is what gets spit out. So the core patterns to know are brackets are how you indicate a variable, parens are how you tell Next to ignore it, and underscore is how you tell Next to pretend it doesn't exist at all, which is what we want to do here. So I'm going to do providers, which means that these are things that won't be included in the routes at all. So I put a page TSX in here, it's not going to do anything. Next is going to ignore this entirely. So I'll put in here posthog provider.tsx. Paste these contents. Oh, look at that. We're getting an error because process.env is not how we're supposed to do this. So we delete that. We import, but it doesn't have them. Hop back over here. Now we're doing our first client variables. Next public posthog key, next public posthog host. Now that we have those, we'll go back here, make sure we have the posthog key and host. We do. Hop back over to posthog provider. Now it knows these exist. I do think we have to settle things in here because it has to know how to bind them. So go down to the runtime env, next public posthog key, Next public Posthog post. All handled for us. Cool. Children needs a type there. Come on, Posthog, give me a typed default. Well, now we have this configured. We have to identify the user. I'll show you guys how to do that in a little bit, but for now, we should get this wrapping our layout. I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to put it one layer lower than the Clerk provider, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Cool. We now have that. We're effectively done. They have a really handy check installation button, which I do want to use. Let's just make sure the environment works how we expect it to. /f/1 does not exist. Localhost 3000. Oh, it looks like some of those files that we moved should be type erroring and aren't. So we're going to move in here and see which ones are broken. Page knows that drive contents is there. Drive contents knows that file and folder table are right here. Here's my favorite way to fix this. Close, reopen, refresh. Please subscribe if you're 2 hours in. You're closer to like 4 now, right? You should hopefully have subbed by now. Poor editor. Anyways, we have that. And if we command control I, we'll see that these resources are getting blocked. Why is this getting blocked? Well, I have an ad blocker, and ad blockers, sadly, are really aggressive about things that aren't ads. They like to block anything that even vaguely resembles tracking, which sucks because we're product engineers. We're not tracking to get a bunch of data about our users. We're tracking so we know what is and isn't working in our apps. But if we go to the Posthog official docs, I'll add Next.js in the search so that we can find it a bit quicker. Next.js. There are some things in here that are going to help us. Configuring a reverse proxy. This is one of those killer features that you need to set up if you're using basically any analytics provider. Otherwise, you're just going to lose a ton of your data from everyone using an ad block or a browser that has something like an ad block built in. So to understand what this does, we first need to understand rewrites. If you're not familiar, a rewrite is a way to take a URL in your app and point it somewhere else that isn't your app. It doesn't redirect, which means change the URL and tell the user, hey, you're going the wrong place. Go here instead. A rewrite silently does it. The benefit is now the user doesn't know they're going somewhere else. The negative is it has to go through your server for that to work. Because I'm not bouncing back and saying, hey, go there instead. I am going there for you, getting the result, and then giving it to you. Because that way you'll never know what happened. This is great because it means that your routes aren't going to be blocked by default the way they would be with an ad blocker, because they can't just block the domain. They have to block specific paths on your domain, which they're not going to do. And if they do, you can change them or point them somewhere else. They're not going to have many options. So we're going to hop into here. We're going to scroll down to the next config. We will paste this verbatim. Make sure you don't forget the skip trailing / redirect. This is because they add slashes sometimes to the end of the URLs. And if you do that, it can break certain things. They need that, so it won't break their things. Not a big deal. I've never had that break other stuff. And now we need to update our init. I actually like that they hard-coded the env there. It's probably the way they should have done it. It's kind of weird that the Posthog setup in the main analytics page is different from in the docs. That's fine. Delete, paste, comma. I did forget to put the environment variables in our Netlify, so I'm going to do that now before I forget to. Environment variables. It's funny, that's actually where I already am here. Add variables, import, paste, import. Cool. Person profiles, identify only. I'll do all the things I want to there in a bit. I do like this a little more than our current provider. They even have little TSX buttons, which adds the types. And all it changes is that children definition there. And for some reason, it tabs this over when it doesn't need to. Docs are hard, okay? Not everybody's docs can be as good as ours. I do need to fix the API host and UI host. So let's see if our friends over at Cursor are smart enough, and they are. Make sure we import env. Nice. They are capturing page views manually somewhere in here. I might skip that. We'll see how they do it, and I'll make a decision. Posthog's page view auto capture relies on page load events. The event doesn't trigger on navigation. It's a single page app because we don't go to the server. So we need our own method for tracking this, which thankfully they provide for us. So I'm going to throw in here page view tracker TSX, export, suspended Posthog page view. And the easiest place to put that is directly below as a child. Because remember, You only have access to things in a provider if you are a child of the provider, not a direct child, but somewhere below it in the tree. So we need to make sure this is mounted below it. The best way to know it's mounted below is to mount it directly below. So now we have our page view tracker, and we have the Posthog page view here. I don't know why this is wrapped in a suspense. Oh, so that the use search params above deops the whole app into client-side rendering. Okay, that makes sense. We get that there, posthog.capture. I'm going to add one more piece down here. I guess up. I want it a little bit higher. Const user equals use auth. Not use user, use auth. This comes from Clerk. The reason I'm putting this here is I want a use effect that identifies the user so we know who they are. If user posthog.identify. Again, it's user.userid. Change that all. Where's the posthog? Okay, I guess posthog has to be higher up. Do that. Posthog user.userid. Cool. So now we have this use effect that identifies the user. We can put additional properties in here too, like email, because we get that from user. Maybe we don't. There's another hook to get that. Const user info equals use. Is it use user? It is. Cool. That's what we wanted then. User info should have a user ID. Does it not? What the fuck does this return? User.id. Cool. So if it exists, user info, user ID, and user info, user email address is 0.email address. Now we're tracking them by their user ID and their email address, and this identifies them, so it's much easier for us to figure things out in the dashboard. And kill the use auth. We just want use user. Now this component is going to get the user's info. It's going to have an effect where whenever it changes, it's going to re-identify the user. And importantly, if this changes to nothing, it will identify them as nothing. I should probably add that case. Else posthog.reset. There. So if we don't have a user ID, we reset posthog. But if we do have a user ID, we update the identity accordingly. Now we track page views. Here we take the path name and the search params and we do a posthog capture page view with the constructed URL whenever the user navigates anywhere in the app. Super, super nice. I think that's everything. As long as the app still works, I'm just going to ship it. Got undefined. Did I forget to import it in layout? Or did this get renamed? Oh yeah, it got renamed when I made the change there. Makes sense. Cool. And look at that. It's working. We're getting an error. Ah, that suspense boundary actually kind of sucks because it's expecting HTML as the immediate child. I knew I had feelings about this. I'm going to show you my preferred fix, which is different from how they did it. We're going to import dynamic from next dynamic. Dynamic's actually a keyword that's used by a bunch of things. So I'm going to change that from dynamic to dynamic loader. And look at that. Once again, cursor being a bro. Suspended posthog page view, dynamic loader, import from page view tracker, object configuring it with SSR false. The reason that this matters is it will guarantee that this will only be rendered on the client, not on the server. Which means we can get rid of that edge case they were worried about with opting the route out of dynamic behaviors because this will always now be dynamic. So if we go back to page view tracker, I can get rid of this whole thing here. Export default function posthog page view. Kill the suspense. Keep that there. And look at that. Oh, why are we still getting an error? Okay, we're going to do a dumb fix that should do it. Gonna move this lower. It was just mad because we were rendering something above the HTML, which technically can't happen. This fixes it. Probably should have been lower anyways, but yeah. Now everything the app actually renders that actually needs access to stuff will be rendered slightly lower. We're good. Well, you know what we do now? We get add -a because I touched too many things. Commit analytics added. Get push, and we go back over to make sure this all was installed proper. We need to actually have it deployed because the way it checks to make sure that we did this right is it scavenges the site and makes sure the JS actually loads. Because if it doesn't, it didn't work. And if it does, it did. Cool, it's deployed. Let's make sure everything is working how we expect it to. Go to our production deployment, T3 tutorial. We'll know it's working if we hop over to the network tab, refresh, and make sure things are going to those endpoints. Oh no, I'm not sure what went wrong there. Little did Theo know the rabbit hole he was going down there. Theo from the future again, this one to correct the last set of errors that Theo was having. You see, it all is posting fine now, but there was a catch before. The catch was that the redirects weren't working as expected. If we hop back into the code, remember when we did this next config thing where we had the rewrites in here? You might notice I don't have those anymore. I don't have those because when you deploy these on Netlify, it's not guaranteed they work exactly the same way. It usually does for most things, but that weird trailing slash thing did not play nice with Netlify. I want to give you a little insight on how I debugged this and then show you how to fix it. The way I debugged this was not just playing around writing code. None of the things I tried there worked. I had to sit and think for a bit. Because when I tested locally, the events were posting fine because they were going through the Next.js rewrite. But there's a difference between dev and prod. I noticed that immediately. My dev environment's doing what it should, prod isn't. So what are the differences between my dev environment and my prod environment? One of the differences is that my dev environment isn't run with build. My prod is. So I tried my pnpm run build command and then served it locally, and it still worked fine on my machine, which meant there weren't many things left, but one of those things left was that it was on Netlify. I'm not saying Netlify is bad, they're actually very good, but they have their own environment things are being deployed to, which means we have to be considerate of potential differences there. I looked up Posthog Netlify. I found a couple results, none of which were particularly helpful. Specifically, when I searched for the error, I wasn't getting anything useful. I did see one PR on GitHub because Posthog's fully open source, so you could see changes to their website on GitHub. And they talked about having issues with rewrites in Netlify because they're deployed on Netlify. So when I looked into it, I found a nice handy little doc here. And this doc shows that you can update the Netlify TOML file to handle these rewrites instead. So what I did is I copied this. It says JavaScript, ignore that. It's actually a TOML file. Go back to the code base, make a new file named netlify.toml, and you're good to go. Everything else I did was correct. This one change was enough to fix it. And we can even look at the PR that did it. Posthog fix attempt. It's not building for some silly reason. I'll go fix that. You'll see all I did is remove the rewrites from here over to here. Yay. And now we're getting all those events in the dashboard, which means we can do a lot of fun things. We can start tracking things per user. I don't know how to properly express how cool it is to have things like this on a platform like Netlify. I'm going to show you the actual T3 chat stats quick. Let's take this chart from my T3 chat project. This is all of the messages per model. And this was not hard to set up. Like having a set of data like this or a graph to visualize it is super easy. All I have to do is go to Product Analytics, hit the New Insight button, and let's create a graph here for this. We don't want page view. We want one of my custom events. So let's find one of those. Let's use chat created, because that's the event I do whenever a user tries to start a new chat. We do total count to see over time how many messages are being sent per day. We can also do different things with it. Like we can start to sum it. So this is just the total count per day. You can see the numbers here, but what if we wanted to see a bit more? What if we wanted to see, I don't know, per model? Well, we can start breaking it down. We'll add a breakdown by, if I just start typing, it's usually pretty smart. Look at that, model, requested model. Now when I click that, we're getting a bar chart showing the difference for which models are being picked and when. I can change this over from a time series to a more cumulative or total value chart. So we can do a bar chart here. And now we can see how much each model is being used. It's so good. Once you start having things where you want to see data from your users, the fact that you can just click around and do this with an open source product that's super cheap to host, it's what I use for all my products. And hopefully this helps you see the value you get using a tool like Posthog. So now that's all done, let's get back to that to-do list. I believe there's a few big things. Events are handled and persisted properly. I'm going to axe that whole section because we're done with it. Let's fix the sort order. That shouldn't be too hard to do. If we hop over to queries, let's just make sure we have an order by on all of these. I'll make it nice and consistent by doing the ID. We can just do files schema.id should just work there. Nice, look at that. Now it's ordered by file schema ID. You can wrap it with ascending or descending if you want to be specific. I don't care which it is. I don't even know which it is by default, but it doesn't really matter too much. And if we go here, we're only selecting one for get all parents. We select one at a time. We get folders, we definitely want to have behave the same way. And if we did all of that correctly, I should now be able to go localhost here, refresh it a few times, and see everything stay in the same order. Yeah, roots at the top. Looks like all of that works. Somehow I think I got root selected in the root folder, which is funny, where it has that set as a parent. Might have just written some bad code that did. Wait, no, I think I accidentally recreated the root folder. Now I think about how the code I wrote for that works. Yeah, there's 2 root folders. That's funny. Anyways, those were all the changes needed to fix the sort order. You can sort it by basically whatever you want. If you wanted to be sorted by name, you could sort it by name instead. You just put a different thing here in order for it to change. But now the sort order is consistent, so refreshing is not going to change how the page looks, which was annoying the hell out of me. Git add -p, cleaned up the readme, fix the order, fixed order. I also didn't check what was breaking, so let's do that quick. Oh, I forgot to put the environment variables in the example. We don't really need the next public Posthog host anymore, do we? Yeah, it's only being used here. So delete, delete, that's not needed. There. And the public Posthog key is public, so it's not too big a deal if that's in your example, but I am still going to randomize it. Cool. Git status, git add -p, git commit, fix lint, git push. I think that's actually a build fix, not a lint fix. Either or, who cares? I think it's time to stop putting off file deletion. Let's do it. So I believe right now the drive contents are a client component because I have some client behaviors in here. There's a couple ways we can handle that, but the easiest one is to just put our actions somewhere else. So we have our server file, which has DB in it. I'm gonna make a new file in here named actions.ts. When you see use server at the top of a file, what that means is use with caution. When you import things from this file, those imports are being turned into REST endpoints that can be hit by your users on different pages. We're going to be putting functions in here that do important things, like allow a user to delete a file. When we do that, whatever we export from here, it needs to be an async function and it needs to be treated safely because every export in here becomes an endpoint. So where this problem comes into play is when we have this delete file, if this gets imported in a route, like let's just import this somewhere that gets mounted like in here. Just gonna import delete file from server actions. Seems nice and innocent, right? Well, just importing this is enough that this is now accessible effectively as an endpoint on this route. And any user, signed in or not, can hit this. And by the looks of this, they can delete any file. So when you export things from a use server file, you have to be extraordinarily careful. This is effectively the same thing as exposing like export async function post. You got to treat it just as carefully. You can't just delete something in a post without verifying and authenticating the user. Do the same here. So when we do this, we need the user's authentication status. Since the user's making this request, we can actually get that data. User data equals await auth. Now we have the, I guess user data is not the right call for this. It would be session. And if no session.user ID, we can return an error. So now we have the session. We know the user is authenticated. We need to know that we're deleting their file. We could fetch the file from DB, check that it's their file, then do the delete. We can do this in one query instead of 2 relatively easily. The key is we need an and here because we don't just want to make sure we're getting the right file. We want to make sure we're getting the right person and the right permissions. So if we do an and here, do a comma, equal, look at that, cursor being extra smart today. It's owner ID, but it was close. So this and make sure that all of these conditions are true so that the file table ID and the file table owner ID match the things that we have here. If the user ID and the owner ID aren't the same, this will not work. But I did just realize there's one important missing piece here. We need to be able to delete the file too. Not just deleting it from the database, but we need to delete it from UploadThing. So how are we going to handle that? Well, I guess I have to do the thing I was just saying I didn't want to, which is get the file. Select from file table where it's the right file ID and the right owner ID. So now we've selected it. We have the file. Well, it could be multiple. So there's an array here. Could be useful to make this multiple files in the future. One of the fun things you can do afterwards. I'm going to wrap this with an array like that. And then if no file, we can return error file not found. Okay, we're doing pretty good here, but there is something that we need. We have the file's ID, which is the one that we set in our database, but what we really need is the file key so we can delete this file. So in order to actually delete the file, we need the UT API. Const UT API equals new UT API. That's so that we can configure it and give it any options that we want to. Now we can do important things like deletes. UTAPI.delete files needs file keys. Sadly, we don't have a file key. We have a file URL. So we can fix this by parsing the file URL. If we go to our app and open one of these URLs, we can see what its format is and rip everything in front. Probably the easiest path for this. File URL.replace /f with empty string. This is not the right way to do this. The right way to do this is to update in your DB and start including the file key in the file table. The URL is where the file is actually fetched from, but what we want more often than not is the file key, because the file key is what indicates what specific file this is. You won't have to look up by this very often, but it's incredibly useful when you want to do something like this with the UploadThing APIs. I'm too lazy to add that in now, and this is going to work. If the URL has changed, which it very well might have, we're in the process of updating our CDN as we speak, make sure whatever URL your files are being uploaded to is the thing that you are replacing here. So we delete the files, and I believe this will return a success and a deleted count. So const UTAPI result equals, I'll console.log that, const db delete result. Good old typos galore. And then we'll return success true at the end there. Now we have this function, and what's really cool about the new Next.js React and server action stuff is I can just import this on a client-side thing and it's fine. So if we hop back over here, we go to file row, we can add a delete icon. So right now it has in the UI size, we need one more column. Honestly, all the files are type file. So I think what I'm going to do is instead of fixing that, which is yet another great fun exercise for you guys, I'm going to move these things around a little bit. We're going to move this to the end and we're going to make this our delete icon. Button type equals, not button type button. I wanted button type icon. Is that not a valid type? Oh, it's a variant. There we go. Default destructive ghost. I was so sure there was an icon one. We'll go with ghost. Look at that. Smart autocomplete. Trash 2 is the icon we're using. Shout out Trash Dev. This is where the composability of the new patterns is magical. We didn't have to handle scoping or variable passing or really much of anything. All I did here is I put in a button, on click, delete file, file.id. And trash 2 icon, class name R3, size 20. This is going to be a little trash icon. We go back here. These aren't right. We can change that relatively quick. Oh, wait, no, the headers are in the parent file, drive contents. So we'll move back up here. Delete file isn't even used there, so we can get rid of that. Scroll down a little further. Swap these. Honestly, I think what I'm going to do is change this to column span 1. We can add back size, but we're going to make a column span 2 this time. Or file type. And this one we'll leave empty for that case. We're going to have to change file row and folder row. So let's do that super fast. We can bring back the type, div, class name. No, this one is, we just hard-coded it to file for now. But again, you should hopefully now know how to change that. Change this to 1. Cool, now we have the little delete icon at the end here. Quite a style on that. Oh, is it this MR3? I think we can give this an area label. Delete file. Cool. Since it doesn't have text, you want to give it an area label. And look at that. Now when I click delete, yeah, nothing happened. If I refresh, it's gone. So we need to update the content. There's a couple ways to do that. The ideal one is you revalidate on the right URL. I don't want to figure out what the right URL is. So I'm going to show you guys one of my favorite next hacks. Const c equals await cookies. We're getting cookies from the Next.js helper. You have to await it now. There's some reasons for that. Check out my video about the magic behind Next if you're curious. So this is the actual thing we use. We're going to cookie.set force refresh to, I don't know if it has to be unique value or not, but we're going to JSON.stringify, not force refresh to. I'm going to give this a random math value, math.random. Cool. You might be curious, what the hell am I doing here? Well, when you update the cookies during a request like this, Next.js will just revalidate the page you're on and send an updated content for that page. So now, if I refresh quick to make sure it all worked, click delete, the file's gone. You don't have to do any additional code. You don't have to write an on change on the client side. You don't have to write a force refetch or anything. Just the act of deleting sends new content down to the page. What's even cooler is if we check the network tab out here, when I do a delete, only one request has to be made. I had that open accidentally, but I had it filtered. Now if I do the delete, watch. Just the one request. And this request, this post that tells the server to delete, also sends the updated content that React needs to update the page, all in a single flight. It's magical. It's so cool that it's gotten that easy to do page updates with so little code. Now we have working delete that only works if you have permission to do the deletions. Okay, we kind of have working delete. We have working delete on files. We don't have it on folders, but I'm going to make that one of those fun things for you guys to do. Fun follow-ups. Folder deletions. Make sure you fetch all of the folders that have it as a parent and their children too. Because you can't just delete the folder, you have to delete all the files in that folder, all the folders in that folder, and then recursively do that down. What I'd recommend doing is collecting all the things you need to delete by going all the way down, keeping track of all of them, and then deleting them all in one pass. So we have our first fun follow-up, but we haven't done the home page yet. Let's do that quick. After, of course, committing the changes we've made here, we need to add the actions file. Okay, so we need to make a home page and an onboarding experience. Easiest way to get started is to sign out. Please subscribe. You're 2 hours in, you nerd. Is probably not the best thing to have here, especially with how long this tutorial's been going. Okay, let's ask V0 to generate something for us. A minimal homepage for a Google Drive clone named, we'll call it T3 Drive. Why not? I don't want the file grid. I just want the homepage. Stop. I'm going to edit. And learning all the tricks for working these AI tools. It should be just a marketing page with a get started button. A gradient would be nice. Give it a second shot here. See if it does a little better. Okay, that's better, but it's a little too bright. Let's ask for a refinement on that. It's too bright. Can we use black and dark neutral grays instead? It is pretty cool to be able to just prompt for something like this. The amount of time I used to spend building these things was obnoxious, and I don't have to. Also, there's a little trick in here. The button as child, it lets you apply the button styles from the shadcn button to something that isn't a button, like a link. So instead of having a link type for your button, you can just do that. That's so much better. That's so much better. Also, a fun fact, the reason I'm back in Vivaldi right now is because I was so tired of gradients and certain other things, but mostly gradients not working right in Firefox, as well as the dev tools being a little not great. So we have our new homepage. Let's hop over to this home folder we made. Paste. We have, oh, it's a tilde in my code base. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. So I do want to make one change here. Right now, this links to this sign up page that might not exist. We probably want to do something different here depending on if you're signed in or not. There's a lot of ways we can do that. We can make it on the server side. We can make it on the client side. What I prefer to do in a situation like this is try to avoid having the client needing to care. Right now, if we were to put like a signed in and a signed out state like this, either this page is going to have to be rendered on the server, which means it takes longer for them to see it, or the client isn't going to know what it's supposed to do when it first loads and it has to like gray out the button or have it come in after. There's a way we can avoid both of those, which is change what this does. So I'm going to get rid of the link here. We're still going to send you somewhere, but right now we'll just have this be a button. I'm going to change one thing though. Type equals submit. We can also start working on the most important part here, which is the form. Action is sign in. We probably aren't going to keep that. But now that we have this and we have a form action, we can do my favorite thing, which is just put a quick use server that does the thing we want to do. const session equals await auth from Clerk. Oh, I wrapped that too many times. There we go. Fix the JSX there. Does need to be async. Again, we don't just check session, we check session.user_ID. If there is no user ID, then we're going to redirect to /signin. Else, we're going to redirect them somewhere else. I'm going to return this so that we early escape. And otherwise, we're going to redirect them to, we'll do /drive. And we're going to make these two routes, and we're going to make them both do different things. Why is that coming from there? It should be next navigation. There we go. Now we have the redirect to sign in. We have the redirect to drive. Since this is all being hit from home, we could put it in here. I think it's probably better to do it higher up, sign in /page.tsx. And now another thing I love to do, copy paste. We're going to delete this guy. And here we'll do the sign in. You know what? We don't need to check signed in or signed out. So let's just do the right thing and always render the sign in form. Sign in button from Clerk. You can delete all of this. And if we did this part right, we'll go back here, click this, and it redirects us to the sign in page. And we click sign in, asks us for our Google Auth, and it's not going to do the other parts right. We have to go deal with the drive part that we weren't dealing with before. So let's go do that. New file, drive/page.tsx. This one's going to be a little weird. Export default function drive page. Obviously, we don't want to just return hello. We want to find your root drive. So let's make that over in queries. Hop in here. Get root folder for user. Close cursor, very close, but we need something here. We need, yes, this is right. It should be is null. Cool. Oh, I didn't import and. First and we've had to do in the query file. That's kind of funny. Okay, so let's go through this query one piece at a time. So we select from the folder schema where the folder schema owner ID is the same as the user's ID and the folder schema parent is null because a folder with a null parent is the root folder. That's what we care about. And then we return folder 0. So now if we hop back over here, const session equals await auth. Cool, let's get smart with all those imports. We need to import the auth function. This does need to be an async route. Session user ID, redirect to sign in if there is no user ID because they need to sign in. And down here, root folder, await. Well, we don't need to import this from DB anymore. We want to queries dot get root folder for user. Now we have the root folder. Well, we should have the root folder. It is possible it's undefined. And if it is undefined, if no root folder, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to create that root folder, but we don't have it yet. It's just going to redirect to this fake route that doesn't exist. So we'll ignore that for now. But if we do have the root folder, which in our case we will, we're going to do the final step here where we return a redirect. We had /f as the route for this. So now if there is no session user ID, we redirect you to sign in. If there's a root folder that we got from the get root folder for user, then we redirect you to that folder. And if there isn't one, we redirect you to the create. We're going to change this to actually do the creation in line. But for now, let's make sure it all works. Signing in now. Oh, it just sent me back to sign in. I am signed in, and we know that because if I go here and click get started, it's going to send us to /drive instead, and then it redirects us to where we need to be, /f/ our root folder. So all those parts work now. Let's handle those edge cases really quick. First one is we need to redirect you to the right place after you sign in. And we do that over in the sign in button. If you press, again, Control Space, this will tell you what you can put here. We can force the redirect URL to be /drive. And now I'm going to go test this real quick. Get started, sign in. Again, sorry phase. And look at that. It redirected us right where we're supposed to be. Seamless. That is actually really cool that it worked that well. But I want to make sure it works when we don't have a root folder. So I'm just going to use my other account instead of deleting from DB because I'm lazy. Honestly, this is good enough that it's worth a commit. So we'll commit it, and then we're going to make our last set of changes before we wrap up. Get status, get add -p, new home page, get add -a, new home page, sign in flow, start of onboarding, get push. And now for the final major change, we need to handle this case. We could just do the creation here, But generally, I prefer to make the user click a button because it makes it less likely you'll hit a weird race condition where things are being done multiple times when they shouldn't. So we're going to do a form, not a forn. Why did it leave the closing forn there? Oh, huh. Look at all of the things that just got pretty accurately figured out automatically. We do want to import button. We do want to import mutations. We need to go make this mutation. We're going to onboard user. That's a pretty solid hallucination. Not really a hallucination if it was right. So what we're doing here is onboard user. We want to create a root folder. We should also probably do this in a way where we're checking to make sure the user hasn't already been onboarded and that this folder doesn't already exist. We also should be doing this in a transaction. If you don't know what any of those words mean, go look them up. We have been going for too long already. I am going to add the returning ID call here so that we have the root folder's ID at the end here. Const root folder ID equals root folder 0 dot ID. Do an exclamation point because it has to exist in this case. And now we're going to put those extra folders in just to be a little more convenient so you can see all of them there. We're going to insert a few things. We'll insert trash. We'll insert shared. We'll insert, okay, starred. I don't want starred. We'll just call this documents. Cool. So I'll read through all this because I just generated a lot of this code. We're inserting into folder schema value, name root, parent null, owner ID, user ID, and then we're returning the ID because we want to have that ID. If we don't put anything like this at the end, we will get just a transaction thumbs up, thumbs down effectively. Now we actually get the ID back so we can use it for other things. We grab that ID by grabbing the first instance on root folder, the first element in that array, taking its ID, and then we insert a bunch of new things, all again with you as the owner, well, the person who was authenticated and the ID passed here. We create these additional folders, then we return the root folder ID. Awesome. Now we'll get all of this. Instead, we're going to change it to, it's not queries.onboard user, it's mutations.onboard user. And what's cool here is we have their user ID because it's embedded and encrypted in the form. We could double check by moving this here, just in case. In fact, I would recommend doing this just to get into the practice. If they don't have a user ID, we redirect them to sign in. But if they do, then we continue. Const root folder ID, so wait, mutations, and then we redirect them to /f/root folder ID. Is it really that simple? Only one way to find out, right? I'm going to sign out of my account. We're going to get started, sign in, continue. We're using a different Google account this time. Oh no, it sent me to the wrong place there. Oh, I forgot to wrap that. I forgot to give this UI. So obviously we should wrap this the same way we wrap the sign-in page so that it looks good. I'll do it real quick. Ideally, you'd put these all in the same, you know what? Let's do this all correctly. I'm going to move Drive and the sign-in page both into the home thing here. And you'll see why in a second. What's cool with these route groups is you can make a shared layout that only affects them. So I'm going to make this layout TSX. We're going to hop back to this root page, paste all this in here, delete all the content below main, do props, children, React node, render the props children, delete all this. And now we need to go back into sign in and page and delete that from in them. Did I leave the footer here? I didn't. The footer should be separate from the main section. Not the biggest deal. Move that there, delete, delete. Wrap this in a React fragment because you can only return one element from a React component. And this makes it so it's one element. And we'll go do the same thing on the page itself. And I guess we should have the copyright on the main page too. How do I put that in the form? I'm dumb. Put that outside of the form. Delete that row. Delete that. Delete all these wrappers. And do that. Look at it. Now this part's nice and simple. And now all of these other pages will have the same exact layout. We have create root folder. We should name that to like get started or start onboarding or something. We have this all looking right. We click there, brings us here. And now, finally, this all goes correct. Let me rename this from create root folder to create new drive. We'll create the new drive. We did it. We're here. I can upload files. We have all these different folders. They all exist. They all work. We're done. We made it. You got to the end. All the parts work. There's a lot of little things we can fix. I do want to commit this, get it done. Yes, yes, yes. Make sure we don't forget that layout and those new files. Commit. We did it. Push it. So there's a bunch of little things we didn't touch that I want to make a quick list of so you guys have fun homework. Obviously, you don't have to do all of these, but you should definitely pick a few because I think it will make you really retain the lessons we all learned here. So we don't have folder deletions. We also don't have folder creations. You should be able to create a new folder. What you'd need to do there is make a server action that takes a name and parent ID and creates a folder with a name and parent ID. Don't forget to set the owner ID. Folder renames is a fun one, but yeah, if you want to do it, you can do it. You do also need to do access control. Right now, any user can access any drive. I just sent you a link. You can see it even if you're not the right person. The solution to that problem is to hop into our page code here, and at the spot where we are just using the param and checking, do one additional check here. I could tell you what it is, but I honestly think it's more fun for you to do that check yourself and figure out what it is, and make sure you handle the case when a user isn't signed in or they're here and shouldn't be. Don't just throw an error. Send them somewhere that makes sense. So access control. Check if user is owner before showing the folder page. One real fun one, if you want to get frisky with it, make a file view page. This one's going to be a fun challenge. Right now we have /f/folder. You'd have to make a different route, probably /file, or maybe this shouldn't have been /folder. Maybe it should have been /drive or something. Up to you how you want to structure these things. But I would highly recommend having a different indicator for files and then make a UI for that, where if it's an image, you render it. If it's not an image, then you do something else with it. But you can have a lot of fun with that. Take a look at my previous tutorial if you want some examples of how to make a good image inline experience like this. Speaking of my last tutorial, one more that could be really fun, toasts. Adding a loading state and just generally adding some UI for when you're uploading a file, because right now it doesn't show you anything. It'd be really nice if it did something at least small, like showing a toast when the files are being uploaded. You could go all the way out and show it in the UI all the time, right when you upload with an optimistic update. Speaking of optimistic updates, one thing that'd be nice is gray out a row while it's being deleted. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can set some state in that component because it is a client component. You could use the fancy new transition hooks if you want to go real deep in modern React and Next.js stuff. But honestly, just setting the state on it that says it's being deleted and rendering different CSS while it's being deleted is a small thing that will make this look quite a bit better. There is so much more we could add here. We could add checks, making sure you haven't went over your file limits. We could actually process the file types and store those correctly in DB. We could go fix the file key thing. There's a lot. A project like this has so many directions you can go with it, and I hope you've been inspired to play a bit more, use these technologies, and go build something fun for you. While this might not be an actual competitor to Google Drive, it should at the very least get you more familiar with all the things that we just played with. Huge thank you to all of our sponsors for making this video possible. This was a grind. We put a lot of time into this tutorial, and also a shout out to my team. Huge thanks to FaZe and Ben for making this video possible. What a grind. And one last thank you to you for making it all the way through. What a journey this one's been. I've never put this much effort into a single video, certainly not a tutorial like this. And I hope you get a lot from it. Know that we would never be able to do these things for free without the support from people like you, as well as all the sponsors that came together to make this one possible. Thank you guys again, and until next time, peace nerds.